A few days later, after finishing all the paperwork, I packed my things and left my in-laws' house. I told my mother-in-law I was leaving today and gave her a polite bow. She glared at me and said, "You've been a terrible wife and mother, from the beginning to the end." Then she accused me of being the worst mother for leaving my kids. I couldn't believe how cruel she was. My kids, Josh and Amy, laughed when they heard what she said. My name is Maria, I'm 42 years old, and I'm a housewife. I live with my husband, Ken, and our 2 kids, Josh and Amy. Our kids are growing up well, and Ken works hard, so everything was peaceful. But things changed recently. My father-in-law passed away, and my mother-in-law moved in with us. Ken, being her only son, felt bad about her being alone, so he decided she would move in without asking me. I always thought he was too attached to his mom, but I didn't expect him to make such a big decision without talking to me. When I objected, he said, "Are you asking me to leave my mom with nowhere to go?" And I had no choice but to agree. After that, it felt like living in a nightmare. My mother-in-law had always disliked me, and now she found every chance to criticize me. "Maria, what's the seasoning for this?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I'll be more careful. I don't like greasy food." "Well, the kids are growing fast, and Ken likes fried food too. Then just make a separate meal for me. I don't want to eat unhealthy food and die early." "I'd love to, but it would cost more and be a hassle." "That's where you come in. Ken makes enough money, so you should be able to handle the finances. You're so spoiled. When I was young, I did all the housework by myself, no matter how hard it was. It's sad that my grandchildren have to live in a house run by such a lazy mother." I wanted to say, "If you have so much to complain about, why don't you do it?" But I held back because if I said anything, Ken would get really angry with me. At first, I tried to stand up to her, but she would always tell Ken, and then he would yell at me, saying, "How dare you talk to her like that when I'm the one supporting you?" I thought about getting a divorce, but as a stay-at-home mom, I couldn't take care of the kids on my own. They are everything to me, and I didn't want to lose them, so I decided to keep quiet and put up with it. Instead of just enduring it, I started planning for a divorce little by little. I applied for jobs at different companies while my mother-in-law watched me all day. Only one company offered me a part-time position. Thanks to my previous job as a bank clerk, I got a clerical job at a bank. It was my first office job in years, and I actually enjoyed it. Of course, it was stressful and came with a lot of responsibility, but it was much better than being stuck at home with my mother-in-law all the time. But my mother-in-law didn't like that I was working. "Why work when Ken makes enough money? Maybe she's out looking for men. What kind of person thinks like that? She's an idiot," she would say. It's true that Ken makes a good salary, but since his mother moved in, our expenses have gone up, so we're not in a position where we can afford everything. Still, my mother-in-law told me I should give her an allowance for my part-time job, to make sure I wasn't spending it on men. When I refused, saying it wasn't possible, she went straight to Ken. That night, when Ken came home from work, he yelled at me just like before. "Are you having an affair?" "What? No, I'm not. My mother said you're using your part-time salary to pay for men." "I'm not doing that." "Why are you believing her lies? Just stop, then prove you're not guilty by giving her the allowance she wants." "Oh no." Then, my mother-in-law came in, smiling smugly. $500 a month. That much? That's what my mother says, so you need to give it to her. In the end, I couldn't fight them both. I had to give most of the money I earned from my part-time job to my mother-in-law as an allowance. To make things worse, she told the kids, "Your mother is a horrible adulterer," with a smirk on her face. Even my kids, who were in junior high, knew what that meant. It was terrible to lie like that. I felt it was so unfair, and it was ruining my life. Then, something happened that made everything even worse. I found out my husband was having an affair. All along, he had been accusing me of cheating, but it was him the whole time. This pushed me over the edge, and they say when you reach your breaking point, everything just comes pouring out. I didn't want to spend another second with these people, so I went straight to get the divorce papers. "I can't stay in this house after what you've done," I told my husband as I confronted him with the papers. He just laughed and said, "I don't want an old woman like you in my house." I knew he was planning to be with his lover after the divorce. He agreed to pay alimony and divide the property without hesitation. When the kids were asked where they wanted to stay, both of them said they wanted to stay in the house. My mother-in-law glared at me and said, I knew you liked your father more than this woman. A few days later, after completing all the paperwork, I packed my bags and left my in-laws' house. I told my mother-in-law I was leaving that day, bowing to her as a gesture of respect. She smirked and sarcastically said, "You've been a terrible wife and mother from the start." Then she added, "You're such a bad mother to leave your children." I didn't know how she could keep making fun of me. My kids, Josh and Amy, laughed at what she said. "See, even the kids are laughing at you. What a pathetic mother." "Well, actually, the kids chose to stay here, so I'm not abandoning them." "Oh, I see, so you're the sad woman who got abandoned by her children." "Say whatever you want, but remember, from now on, you're the one in charge of everything here. Don't worry about me, unlike you, I can handle everything." "Alright then, I really must be going now." With that, I left my in-laws' house. I went back to my parents' house and threw myself into work. I asked my job to switch me to full-time and took the test to become a full-time employee. Thankfully, I got the position. Now I could take the kids with me, and I knew my mother-in-law would be worn out soon. Sure enough, about 3 months later, my mother-in-law called me. "Maria, help me out." "What's wrong?" "I need to take Josh to his soccer games and even help with training camps during the summer. Plus, I have to make his lunch for morning practice and wash his dirty uniforms every day. Amy also goes to cram school, so I have to drive her there and back every day, and I'm doing all the housework by myself." Ken says he's tired from work and doesn't help at all. If you're just going to complain, I'm hanging up. Wait, I'm calling because I need your help. Sorry, I'm already divorced, so this isn't my problem. Please don't say that. I'm not going back, but I understand that you can't handle everything on your own. I can't trust you with my precious children. I'll take them, that's what they want. What? They want to stay here. They just want you to understand how hard I've been working. What? Yes, when I decided to get a divorce, the first thing I did was talk to the kids. They said they'd stay with you at first. Amy said, "But that means grandmother and the others are just kicking you out." "Right, Mom?" Then Josh said, "I don't like that. We know how hard you work, Mom, so they decided to stay and show you how hard it is to live with you." I was so relieved to know that my kids were on my side. I made up my mind that I would work hard and make enough money to bring them home for good. Well then. Yes, everything went according to plan. I'm now a full-time employee, and I'll take the kids. Oh no. I hired a lawyer and demanded custody. Since the kids wanted to live with me, the court quickly agreed to transfer custody. When I told his boss about the affair, they were shocked. My ex-husband was moved to a department where he wouldn't be able to advance in his career. Because of this, he can no longer afford the mortgage on the house. My ex-mother-in-law was also ordered to get a job, which she hated. She was furious that her son was making decisions for her. Now, my ex-husband and ex-mother-in-law are blaming each other. They'll probably have to leave the house, but that's not my concern anymore. As for me, I rented an apartment and moved in with my children. They're growing up to be amazing kids. My daughter cooks, and my son helps with the laundry and cleaning. I want to be able to support them so they can do whatever they want in the future, so I'm going to keep working hard to earn money. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.
While I was on a dream trip to Italy, my sister called. I sold your $9 million penthouse for just $4.5 million to fund my crypto startup. My heart sank. Betrayed. Furious, I flew home the next day. But when I arrived, I couldn't stop laughing because she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would have to outsmart her own sister. But life, as I've learned, doesn't care much about what kind of person you think you are. My name is Eleanor Lawson. I'm 33, an architect living in New York City, and up until last year, I had everything in place, at least on the outside. My name was starting to mean something in the design world. I'd just finished a major renovation of a historic skyscraper in Manhattan, something most architects my age would kill to have on their resume. Magazines called me a rising force in modern design. Clients were emailing my assistant nonstop. I had money in the bank, a penthouse apartment in Soho worth $9 million, and a small but loyal team I trusted with my work. On paper, everything was perfect. But the truth was I had one weakness. And her name was Chloe. Chloe is my younger sister, 25, wild, impulsive, and charming when she wants to be. We grew up in Boston with our dad, Tom, after our mom passed away when I was 15 and Chloe was 7. I played the big sister, the substitute mom, and maybe that's where it all went wrong. She got used to being rescued. Credit card debt in college? I paid it off. Missed rent for the 3rd time in a year? I wired money without asking questions. Every time I told myself, she'll grow up. She just needs a little help. But deep down, I knew better. Still, I never cut her off. Maybe out of guilt. Maybe out of habit. So when I told her I'd be gone for 2 weeks at a design conference in Milan, I didn't think twice. I left her a key, only for emergencies, I said, and headed off to Italy, imagining late nights talking about sustainable facades and urban architecture. I felt like I finally had a grip on my life. That illusion shattered on the 10th day of my trip. It was around 3 a.m. in Milan when my phone rang. I was too groggy to read the caller ID before I answered. Eleanor, Chloe's voice whispered. She sounded breathless, nervous. I had to sell it.
What?
Sell what? The apartment. I had to. My company needed the funds. You're successful. You'll be fine. The call dropped. I sat there, staring at the black screen, heart racing. I booked the next flight home. I landed in New York feeling like a stranger in my own city. I didn't even go to the apartment. I went straight to my lawyer. Within hours, it was confirmed. My apartment had been sold to an overseas buyer. Cash deal. Quick and quiet. All done through forged documents that used my name, my signature. The sale price? $4.5 million. Half its real value. I couldn't breathe. This wasn't just betrayal, it was robbery. And from my own sister. But instead of storming over to wherever Chloe was staying and demanding answers, I did something she would never expect. I went quiet. I made one phone call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Alex Mercer, 38, former cybersecurity specialist, now a private digital investigator. We'd met in college during a group project. He helped me recover my hard drive when my final design files vanished a day before presentation. We stayed in touch here and there. I knew he was the kind of guy who could dig into digital shadows most people didn't even know existed. When I called, he answered on the second ring. Eleanor Lawson. Haven't heard that voice in a while. I need your help, I said. He listened without interruption as I explained everything. Then, in his usual calm tone, he said, "Meet me tomorrow. And bring every document you have." That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in a hotel room, quietly going through every file, every email, every message Chloe had sent me in the past 6 months. And then I smiled. Because Chloe had made a mistake, a big one. She thought she sold my real apartment. But she didn't. The apartment she sold was a decoy. Years ago, after she maxed out a credit card under my name and left me to clean up the mess, I decided I'd never be caught off guard again. I bought a second apartment, almost identical in layout, in the same neighborhood, but under a shell company with no ties to me. I moved all my valuables, art, documents, backups into that second unit. The The one she sold had nothing irreplaceable, just enough to look convincing. Chloe had no idea. And now, she believed she'd gotten away with it. I let her think that. When we finally met face to face a few days later, she greeted me with a shaky hug. "I know you're mad," she said. But I was desperate. I didn't have a choice. I looked her in the eye. "I'm not mad, Chloe. I just want to understand." And just like that, she started talking. About her startup. How close she was to launching. How the crypto world was the future. How the apartment sale was an investment in both our futures. I nodded along, but in my mind, I was already 10 steps ahead. I knew who she sold it to. I knew where the money went. And with Alex's help, I was going to follow the trail all the way to the end. She thought I'd forgive her. She had no idea what I was planning. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was pretending like it didn't break me. After that first meeting with Chloe, I walked away feeling hollow. She hugged me again before I left, said something about sisterhood and rebuilding trust, and I just smiled like I believed her. But inside, I was already building something else entirely. The next morning, I met with Alex in a quiet cafe in Brooklyn. He looked almost exactly the same, tired eyes, calm voice, and always scanning the room like he didn't trust the world. I handed him a folder with copies of everything, the fake documents, wire transfers, bank activity, even Chloe's social media posts. He flipped through them without speaking. Then he looked up. "She's sloppy." That was the first good news I'd heard in days. "She used her personal email to communicate with the buyer," he continued. "Didn't even mask her IP. The money was transferred into a business account under her name, not even offshore. She's either overconfident, desperate, or both." "Definitely both," I said. Alex leaned back in his chair. "We can track every dollar if you want. But I have a feeling this isn't about getting the money back." "It's not," I said. "It's about making sure she doesn't get away with it. And making sure no one else gets burned." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll need to be patient. Let her think she's ahead. That's when people make mistakes." So that's what we did. For weeks, I pretended everything was fine. I checked in with Chloe, asked about her crypto startup, listened to her go on about investors and app development like she was running the next Google. She didn't even seem guilty. That's what got me. She acted like what she did was just business. "I'm doing this for both of us," she told me one night over wine, as if she hadn't just stolen half my life. "You're so tied up in clients and meetings. You don't see the big picture. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity." I wanted to scream, but I just smiled. Meanwhile, Alex was tearing through her digital footprint. He found inconsistencies in her investor documents, names that didn't match, money that didn't add up. One so-called investor had no record of ever existing. Another had filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau just a week earlier, claiming Chloe ghosted him after taking a development fee. "She's running on hype," Alex said. "Her platform doesn't even work. She's using buzzwords to pull in fast cash, but it's all smoke." It was worse than I thought. She wasn't just reckless. She was dangerous. And I had a decision to make. I could go to the police, report the forgery, the fraud, the money trail. But something in me stopped. I don't know if it was pride or the desire to control the outcome. Maybe it was the fact that Chloe would drag my name down with hers. Headlines like "Architect's Sister in Crypto Scam" didn't sound like the legacy I wanted. So I asked Alex, "Can we bring her down without going through the system?" He smirked. "We don't need courtrooms. We just need an audience." That's when we built the plan. Alex created a fake investor profile, a venture capitalist from San Francisco with a few flashy media appearances, a background in fintech, and a sudden interest in Chloe's company. He even set up a website, a LinkedIn page, the whole persona. Chloe bought it instantly. "This could be the break I've been waiting for," she told me one night, buzzing with excitement. "He wants a pitch meeting. I think he's serious." Of course, she thought he was serious. That's how desperate she was. Alex scheduled the meeting in a rented office downtown. I told Chloe I wanted to be there, to support her, to see how far she'd come. She beamed like I was proud of her. She had no idea I was the one setting her up. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my real apartment, the one she never knew about, and looked at everything she would have taken from me if I hadn't been prepared. My mother's sketchbook, the painting I bought with my first paycheck, the blueprints of every project I'd ever loved. That's when it hit me. Chloe hadn't just stolen an apartment. She tried to erase my life. But I had something she never would: control. The morning of the meeting, Chloe wore her best blazer, hair straightened, pitch deck printed, and bound. She was buzzing with confidence. I sat beside her, watching her sell a fantasy to a man who didn't exist. She talked about blockchain, liquidity, token growth, words she barely understood, thrown together like magic spells. And then Alex gave the cue. "I just have one more question," he said, leaning forward. "Where exactly did the startup funding come from?" Chloe blinked. "Well, I had some savings. And my sister helped me out. She's supportive." "She didn't give me permission," I said quietly. Her face went white. I pulled out a recorder from my bag and pressed play. Her voice filled the room. From that night, she called me in Milan. "I had to sell it. My company needed the funds. You'll be fine." She froze. Her eyes darted from me to Alex, to the fake investor logo on the wall. "This isn't real," she whispered. You set me up?" I stood up and smoothed my jacket. "No, Chloe. You set yourself up. I just showed everyone who you really are." She didn't speak. For once, she had nothing to say. But I wasn't done yet, because Chloe's world was about to collapse, and I'd only just begun. I left that room without looking back. Chloe sat frozen in her chair, as if someone had pressed pause on her entire life. And in a way, I had. Everything she'd built, every lie, every inflated claim, every stolen dollar, was now under a spotlight she never saw coming. Alex uploaded the recorded conversation to a secure cloud drive, sent it anonymously to a few interested parties, investors she had wooed, tech reporters who lived for scandal, and a certain forum where failed crypto schemes were dissected like cold cases. It didn't take long. By the next morning, her voice was echoing across YouTube and Twitter. "I had to sell it. My company needed the funds." Over and over. Some called her bold, others a scammer. But the headlines were clear: crypto queen or con artist. Articles dissected her credentials, questioned her business, and speculated on legal action. Investors began to speak out. One said she promised them a working prototype by January. Another revealed she guaranteed a 400% return. It was a domino effect. The illusion shattered. Meanwhile, I was silent. I didn't release any personal statements. I didn't speak to the press. I let the truth do the talking. And that's the thing about truth. It doesn't scream. It whispers just loud enough to destroy you. Chloe called me 3 times that day. I didn't answer. By the 4th, I turned off my phone completely. It wasn't revenge that satisfied me. It was the control. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to Chloe's chaos. I was leading it. Later that week, Alex and I met again. We sat on a bench near the Hudson River, watching the water roll endlessly past, as if nothing had changed. But I had. "She's tanking," he said, sipping his coffee. "Her backers are pulling out. The IRS is asking questions. One guy even hired a lawyer." "She'll try to blame me," I said. "She already has. But you're clean. The shell company protected your assets. That fake apartment was the smartest move you ever made." I didn't respond right away. I was thinking about everything that could have gone differently. If I hadn't created that decoy apartment. If I had pressed charges when she first stole from me years ago. If I'd never answered that phone call from Milan. But the past wasn't something I could edit. "She could have just asked," I said. I might have helped her if she was honest. Alex gave me a knowing look. People like Chloe don't ask. They take. And they only regret it when they get caught. That stung because it was true. The next day, Chloe finally showed up, uninvited, of course. She stood outside the real apartment, the one she thought she'd sold, wearing oversized sunglasses and looking like she hadn't slept in days. I watched her through the peephole for a full minute before opening the door. You lied to me, she said, her voice shaky. You made me believe. I made you believe nothing. I cut in. You did that all on your own. She pushed past me into the hallway, staring at the familiar walls, the art, the furniture she thought was gone. This was a trick, a setup. No, I said. This was protection. I've been protecting myself from you for years. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't move to comfort her. I couldn't. I was tired of the lies, of the guilt, of being the responsible one. I had nothing left to give her. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I nodded. But you did. She walked to the center of the living room and looked around like she was seeing my life for the first time. So what now? She asked. You ruin me? Let everyone think I'm a monster? I don't have to let them. You did that yourself. Eleanor. You stole from me, Chloe. You sold my home. You lied to investors. You could have gone to jail. I chose not to press charges. That's more than you deserve. She stared at me, maybe realizing for the first time that I was serious, that there wouldn't be another rescue, that I wasn't coming to save her this time. You don't get to play the victim now, I added. You didn't just steal money. You stole trust. And that's priceless. She broke down then, tears, apologies, all the emotional performance I'd seen before. But it didn't touch me this time. My heart had finally learned the difference between love and obligation. She left without another word. And I stood there in my apartment, my real apartment, alone but intact. Later that night, I got a text from Alex. Investor lawsuit filed. She's going to be tied up in legal mess for years. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance. Just a quiet sense of peace. The storm had passed. People say revenge is sweet. But this didn't feel sweet. It felt necessary. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who keeps crossing lines is to stop drawing new ones. That was the moment I knew. I had finally let go. Not just of Chloe, but of who I used to be. And what came next? I wasn't sure. But I knew it would be mine and mine alone. It's strange how quiet your life becomes after you cut out the noise. The days after Chloe's downfall were almost too still. No damage control, no guilt-ridden calls, no cleaning up behind her like I used to. Just silence. The kind that feels earned. I spent most of my time back at work, back in rhythm, sketching designs late into the night with music playing low and the windows open. The city hadn't changed, but I had. There was something different in the way I carried myself, lighter, sharper, a little more guarded maybe. I didn't have to look over my shoulder anymore. Chloe had always been the chaos in my otherwise carefully structured life. And now she was gone, not just physically, but in every way that mattered. I saw her name in the news for weeks. Investigations, lawsuits, angry investors lining up to expose her lies. But I never spoke publicly. I never needed to. The truth was already out there, and the story told itself. My name stayed out of it. Alex made sure of that. He wiped every trace of my connection to her crypto company, to the forged apartment sale, even to the buyer. I stayed clean, untouched. The one thing I couldn't wipe away, though, was the sadness. Because even after everything, after the lies, the betrayal, the theft, she was still my sister. I kept thinking back to when we were kids. Before life hardened both of us. Chloe used to follow me around like a shadow, asking questions about everything. Why are buildings so tall? Why do blueprints look like puzzles? I'd sit with her on the floor and show her my school projects, and she'd pretend to understand, nodding like she was in on the secret. We used to laugh. And I miss that girl. I still do. But she's not the same person anymore. And maybe I'm not either. One morning, about a month after everything went down, I got a letter in the mail. Not a message or an email, an actual handwritten letter. From Chloe. She didn't beg or plead. She didn't ask for money or forgiveness. She just said she was sorry. That she'd lost herself chasing something fake. That she hoped, someday, I'd remember the good parts of her, not just the worst things she ever did. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I rarely opened. Not because I forgave her, but because I wasn't ready to throw it away. Some things deserve space, even if they never fully heal. Alex and I stayed in touch. He never asked for anything in return. I've seen people lose everything to family, he said once. You handled it better than most. Maybe that was true. Maybe not. But I was proud that I hadn't gone low when I had the chance. I didn't destroy Chloe. I let her destroy herself. And that, I learned, was more powerful than any courtroom or sentence. One evening, I hosted a small dinner in my real apartment, the one no one ever got to take from me. Just a few close friends, some wine, laughter. It felt like closure. After everyone left, I stood by the window, looking down at the city lights, thinking about how close I came to losing everything. Not just my home or my money, but the version of myself that believed trust was unbreakable. Now, I believe something else. Trust is fragile. You don't protect it by hoping. You protect it by preparing. That's why I built a second apartment in the first place. That's why I formed the shell company. That's why I never let my guard down again after the first time Chloe crossed the line. People might call it paranoia. I call it survival. I still think about her sometimes. I wonder where she ended up after the dust settled. Whether she's rebuilding or repeating her mistakes. Whether she still believes the world owes her something. But I don't reach out. And I don't wait for her to. I made peace with what happened. Not by forgetting, but by accepting that some people you love will break your heart more than once. And that healing doesn't always mean letting them back in. Sometimes it means closing the door, locking it, and knowing you're still whole inside. That's my story. Not just of betrayal, but of caution, of quiet strength, of learning that being 2 steps ahead doesn't make you cold, it makes you ready. And in a world like this, readiness is everything. So no, I don't regret what I did. I don't regret staying calm when I could have burned everything down. I chose the long game. The one where I win not by revenge, but by walking away intact. Because the truth is, I didn't lose my apartment. I didn't lose my name, my career, or my dignity. All I lost was an illusion. And in the end, I gained something far more valuable. Clarity. At 9, I was thrown into the freezing rain like trash. Bruised, broken, and betrayed. My parents thought I'd disappear forever. But years later, I returned, not for love, but for revenge. What I did next left them begging. You won't believe how it ends. My name is Leah Carter, and I want to tell you about the night my life changed forever. I was only 9 years old, but I remember every moment like it happened yesterday. People always think childhood is supposed to be full of laughter, toys, and bedtime stories. Mine was different. Mine was built on silence, fear, and pretending to be someone I wasn't, just to feel wanted. We lived in a huge house in a quiet, wealthy neighborhood in Austin, Texas. From the outside, it looked perfect. White fences, spotless gardens, shiny black cars parked in the driveway. But once you stepped inside, the air got cold. The walls were polished, the furniture untouched, and everything had its place except me. My parents, Victor and Elaine Carter, ran a chain of luxury home decor stores. They were well known in our community, dressed in designer clothes, always smiling for magazine features or charity events. People thought they were kind, generous, and successful, but they didn't see what happened behind closed doors. My parents only valued 2 things, perfection and appearances. And I was neither. My younger sister, Emily, she was their golden child. 2 years younger than me, but always praised like she was royalty. She played piano without missing a note, never spilled her juice, never forgot her manners. She was delicate and obedient, everything I wasn't. I was clumsy, curious, always asking questions. If I tripped or dropped something, my mother would hiss under her breath, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" I tried, I really did. I practiced smiling in the mirror just the way Emily did. I sat with my back straight, folded my hands, even stopped talking too much. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. There were no bedtime hugs, no kisses on the forehead, only cold stares, sharp words, and pressure, always pressure. My father, Victor, had this way of looking at me like I was a stain he couldn't clean off his shirt. And my mother, Elaine, well, she acted like she didn't even have two daughters. Just Emily. I remember the night everything finally broke. It had been storming all day, thunder shaking the windows, rain slapping the glass. I was dusting the living room, something they made me do every evening, even though I was just a kid. And then, it happened. I accidentally knocked over a tall, narrow glass vase standing by the fireplace. I heard it hit the floor before I could even react. The shattering sound was loud, like 100 tiny explosions. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. I didn't know what to do. I just stared at the broken pieces scattered across the floor like jagged ice. A few seconds later, my father's footsteps came thundering down the hallway. His face was already red when he saw the vase. I tried to speak, tried to say it was an accident, but I couldn't get a word out. "That vase cost $3,000, he roared. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I opened my mouth, but then it happened. His hand flew out and slapped me across the face, so hard my ear rang. I stumbled back, tears welling in my eyes. One hand pressed against my burning cheek. "Get out," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I blinked. What? "You heard me," he growled. "Get out of my house." I turned to my mother, standing at the end of the hallway. She had been watching. She didn't say a word. She didn't even blink. "Elaine," I whispered. "Mom." She just turned away. I don't know how long I stood there before I realized he meant it. He wasn't going to change his mind. No one was going to stop him. I grabbed my thin coat from the hallway, slipped on my shoes with trembling hands, and stepped out into the storm. The rain hit me like needles, soaking me within seconds. My skin burned where he had slapped me. My chest felt like it was caving in. I kept walking because I didn't know where else to go. I didn't cry. Not at first. It was like I had no more tears left to give. The streets were empty, just glowing streetlights and puddles reflecting them like mirrors. My legs hurt. My clothes stuck to my body. I was 9 years old and alone in the middle of a storm. I didn't understand why. Why wasn't I enough? Why didn't they love me? I don't know how far I walked or how long I wandered. But eventually, a truck pulled up beside me. The window rolled down, and a familiar voice called out, "Leah?" I turned my head, squinting through the rain. It was Uncle Rob. "Uncle Rob," I whispered. He jumped out of the truck and rushed over. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around me. His arms were warm, solid, and for the first time that night, I felt safe. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, kneeling to my level, brushing the wet hair from my face. "Why are you alone?" "They kicked me out," I said. My voice cracked. "Dad hit me. I broke something." He got mad. Uncle Rob didn't say a word for a moment. His jaw clenched and his eyes darkened. "Get in the truck," he said softly. "You're coming home with me." He drove us through the storm, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than I'd ever seen. His small house was warm and messy, full of blankets and the smell of old coffee. It wasn't like my parents' house, but it felt real. It felt like something I'd never had. He didn't ask a lot of questions that night. He just gave me dry clothes, made me a cup of hot cocoa, and told me I could sleep in his guest room for as long as I needed. He said I wasn't going back there. Not unless I wanted to. And I knew I didn't. That night, lying in a warm bed, I listened to the rain outside. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for them to come find me. I just stared at the ceiling, my cheeks still sore, and thought, maybe this is what freedom feels like. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know how I'd explain any of this. But one thing was clear. My old life was gone. And for the first time in years, I was okay with that. Living with Uncle Rob was like waking up from a long nightmare I didn't know I was in. At first, I kept waiting for the rules to start. Waiting for him to tell me I wasn't good enough or that I needed to act more like Emily. But he never did. He treated me like I mattered, like I was a person, not a problem. The first week, I barely spoke. I was still scared, still waiting for the floor to crack open and send me right back to that cold, silent house. Uncle Rob gave me space. He didn't push. He just made sure I ate, made sure I had clean clothes, and left a night light on in the hallway in case I got scared. It was the smallest thing, but no one had ever done that for me before. Eventually, I started to come out of that shell. Uncle Rob enrolled me in a new school across town, and for the first time, I walked into a classroom where no one knew me as the disappointment. I wasn't compared to Emily. I wasn't already labeled. I was just Leah. It was hard at first. I was behind in some subjects and nervous all the time, afraid to say the wrong thing or mess up. But slowly, I began to grow. I made a friend named Kayla in 6th grade who sat with me at lunch and let me borrow her colored pens. We laughed about dumb things, made silly drawings, and shared secrets. It was small, but it mattered. Uncle Rob would ask me how school was every day, and he actually listened when I answered. He came to parent-teacher conferences and school plays. Even when I had a tiny role in the background, he cheered like I was the star. I started to feel proud of myself. Not because I was perfect, but because I was trying. Years passed, and I began to understand more about the kind of people my parents really were. Rob told me once, in the calmest voice, "Your mother was always hard. But after she married your father, it got worse." I tried to stay close, but she shut me out. I wasn't going to watch them destroy another life. I think that's when I realized he had saved mine. By the time I turned 16, I knew what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to help people, kids like me, especially. I started volunteering at a local shelter, helping organize donated clothes and serve meals. It made me feel useful. It made me feel alive. When I was 19, I got accepted into a small community college on a scholarship. I cried when I got the letter. Not because of the school, but because I had made it there on my own. No help from Victor. No fake praise from Elaine. Just me. I started working part-time at a social service center near campus, assisting with youth programs. I sat with kids who had been through things I understood too well: shame, fear, abandonment. I didn't have all the answers, but I listened. Sometimes, that's all someone needs. Then one evening, while I was sorting old journals in a box at Rob's house, my phone buzzed. The screen showed a name I hadn't seen in years: Emily. I froze. I didn't even know she had my number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me tap the screen. "Leah?" Her voice was quiet, almost nervous. "It's me." I didn't say anything for a moment. Hearing her voice felt strange, distant. "I found your journals," she continued. "The ones you left behind. In the attic." I read them. I sat down slowly. "You weren't supposed to." "I know. I shouldn't have," she interrupted. "But Leah, I had to know the truth. And now I do." The line went silent for a moment, and then she whispered, "They're doing it to me too." I felt something twist in my chest. "What do you mean?" "They won't let me make any decisions," she said. "They told me I can't be a photographer, that it's a waste of talent. Dad's trying to make me work at the stores, and she's trying to set me up with this guy I barely know, just because he's from a wealthy family." A rush of emotions hit me all at once: shock, anger, even sadness. For years, I thought Emily was their perfect angel. I thought she had everything. But now I realized she had just been their puppet. "I don't want to end up like them," she said. "I don't want to be cold and bitter. I want to feel free, like you." I swallowed hard. "You think I'm free?" "You are," she said. "You got away." There was a long pause before I said, "Do you want to leave?" She didn't answer right away. But then, softly, "Yes. I don't know where to go." I looked around Rob's small living room. He was in the kitchen, humming to himself as he cooked dinner. "Come here," I said. "We'll figure it out." Emily came 2 days later with one suitcase and her camera. Rob didn't say much, but he nodded when I explained everything. "Family helps family," he said, "even when the rest of the world turns its back." It was strange at first. Emily and I hadn't been close in years. But slowly, we started talking again. She told me how her parents never praised her real dreams. How they only loved the version of her that followed orders. She had been trapped, just like I had, just in a prettier cage. I could feel something burning inside me. They had thrown me away like I was trash. Now they were trying to do the same thing to her. And suddenly, I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. Not the kind of anger that makes you cry. The kind that makes you act. I knew it was time. Time to show them they couldn't control everything. Time to stop pretending their cruelty was normal. I had lived in silence long enough. That's when the idea of revenge began to grow. Not for myself alone, but for every child who had been made to feel worthless under their roof. And I knew exactly where to start. I didn't want revenge out of spite. It wasn't about getting even anymore. It was about justice for the child I used to be, for Emily, and for the kids I met every day who were stuck in families that only knew control and cruelty. My parents had built their lives on a perfect image, hiding everything rotten behind it. I was done letting them get away with it. It started with the journals. The ones Emily found. I went through them again, page by page, reliving memories I had buried just to survive. I wrote everything in those pages. Names. Dates. What they said. What they did. At the time, I didn't know why I was recording it all, but now I understood. That was my proof. Emily helped. She remembered moments I had forgotten. Together, we created a timeline, every time our parents had mistreated us or used us to boost their reputation. And then Emily said something I didn't expect. You know how Dad always said our stores were spotless? That everything was done by the book? I looked up from the notes. Yeah. Well, she continued, I found something. In his office drawer. He doesn't know I saw. Tax papers. Some of them look fake. That got my attention fast. We went through everything she had saved on her phone. Photos of documents, invoices that didn't line up, and emails between Dad and a man named Brent, who clearly wasn't handling things legally. For years, Victor Carter had been cheating the system, hiding money, avoiding taxes, and paying off inspectors to look the other way. And while he was doing all of that, he had the nerve to act like we were the ones who failed him. It wasn't enough just to know. I wanted people to see the truth. I created a new email account, one that couldn't be traced, and sent copies of the documents to a few local reporters. I didn't say much, just enough to make them curious. You might want to look into Victor Carter of Carter Interiors. His books aren't as clean as they seem. At the same time, I reached out to one of the employees from Dad's stores, someone I remembered from when I was younger. Ms. Geraldine. She had worked the front desk for over 15 years and had always been kind to me, even when my parents weren't. I called her anonymously, just to ask questions. She ended up telling me more than I expected. He treats the staff like they're machines, she said. No overtime pay, constant pressure. He fired 3 people last year for asking about their bonuses. I added that to the list. By the end of that week, 3 different news outlets had received enough dirt to dig deep, and they did. It started with a small article on a local blog. Then it hit the newspaper. Headlines started circling. Austin business tycoon under investigation for tax fraud. Our parents didn't know it was us at first, but we knew it was only a matter of time before they suspected. The phone call came 3 days later. I was at the youth center where I volunteered when my phone lit up. The screen said Mom. I almost didn't answer, but I wanted to hear what lies she'd tell this time. Leah, she said sharply, as if I had just stepped out of the house that morning. I didn't speak. What's going on? Are you involved in this nonsense going around in the media? Still silent. You think you're smart? You think you're hurting us? You're just ruining your own name. That made me laugh. You ruined my name when you left me in a storm with nothing but a coat. She hesitated, then tried a softer tone. It's not too late to come home, Leah. We can fix this. You don't have to throw everything away. I already did, I said. Everything I didn't need. I threw it away the night you slammed that door on me. I hung up. That same evening, Emily and I sat on the porch with Uncle Rob. He was reading the latest headline on his phone. Carter Interiors was now facing a full audit. Business partners were pulling out. Their investors were furious. The empire was shaking, and it was beautiful to watch. You sure this is what you want? Rob asked me gently, putting his phone down. I nodded. They taught me that power is everything. I'm just showing them what it feels like to lose it. Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. We're not doing this just to destroy them. We're doing it to free ourselves. She was right. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was closure. Around that time, we came up with an idea, something that could give back in a way our parents never did. A center for youth like us. A place where kids facing emotional abuse, rejection, or pressure could just exist without fear of being judged. We called it the Phoenix House because we were rising from ashes, building something new. Rob offered to help us find a space. We used our savings, reached out to contacts from the shelter I worked at, and raised money online. People cared more than we thought. Survivors, donors, even neighbors came forward to support the cause. Every wall we painted, every bed we built, every program we designed, it was like gluing our own broken pieces back together. We weren't victims anymore. We were architects of something better. But I knew the story wasn't over yet. I knew they'd come back. One last time. The call came just 2 days before the Phoenix House was set to open. I was sitting on the floor, surrounded by boxes of books and donated supplies, when my phone rang again. This time it was my father. I didn't want to answer. My heart thudded in my chest, and part of me thought about throwing the phone across the room. But I needed to hear it. I needed to know what he'd say now that everything was falling apart around him. "Leah," he said as soon as I picked up. His voice was low, tired. "We need to talk." I stayed silent. "Look, I know things got complicated," he continued, like we were old business partners with a disagreement instead of a father who abandoned his child in the rain. "But this smear campaign, this chaos in the media, it's gone too far. You need to stop." I closed my eyes. "I'm not the one who needs to stop, Dad. Maybe if you had told the truth from the start, you wouldn't be in this mess." There was a pause, then a sigh. "You're bitter. I get that. But you're not helping yourself either. That center you're starting? It's not going to last. You don't have the money, the experience, the heart." I snapped. "Because that's what you never had. And that's the only thing that matters." His voice hardened. "We're still your family, Leah." I felt something inside me break, not from pain, but from the final thread of attachment I'd been holding on to. "You stopped being my family the night you turned your back on me. The night Mom watched you throw me into the storm and did nothing. I don't care what happens to you now. I'm not your daughter anymore." "You'll regret this," he said. "No," I whispered. "I regret ever wanting your love." Then I hung up. I sat there in the quiet for a moment, the weight of it all finally lifting. That was the last piece. The last conversation. I had nothing left to say to them, and they had nothing left to take from me. The day of the Phoenix House grand opening felt like a dream. The small building we had turned into a safe space was decorated with hand-painted signs from volunteers and fresh flowers in jars. Kids from the neighborhood, local supporters, and people from the shelter came to celebrate with us. Uncle Rob stood beside me, holding a cup of coffee and beaming like a proud father. Emily stood on my other side, her camera around her neck, snapping pictures of every smile, every laugh, every hug. For once, the past didn't feel like a shadow over me. It felt like fuel. I gave a small speech that afternoon. Nothing fancy, just the truth. "I was once a girl who thought she had no worth," I said, my voice steady. "I was told I was a failure, a mistake, someone who didn't belong. But I was wrong to believe them. Because here, in this place, with these people, I found something real. And if you've ever felt the way I did, I want you to know, you're not alone. And you are never worthless." People clapped, some even wiped away tears. But for me, the biggest moment came later, when a young girl named Tessa, maybe 12 years old, tugged at my sleeve. "My mom says I'm too loud and weird," she said softly. "She says I ruin everything." I knelt down and looked her in the eyes. "You don't ruin anything, Tessa. You just haven't been heard by the right people yet." She smiled a little, and I knew right then we were doing something that mattered. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the big windows, Emily walked over and handed me a photo she had just printed. It was a picture of the three of us, her, me, and Rob, standing in front of the center, arms around each other. "They'd hate this picture," she joked. I laughed. "Good." That night, the three of us sat on the porch outside Rob's house. No words, just the hum of the night around us. It was peaceful, whole. a kind of stillness I never thought I'd feel. Emily leaned back and looked at the stars. Do you think they'll ever change? I thought about it for a long time. Then I said, maybe. But I'm not waiting around to find out. I meant it. The scandal didn't go away for Victor and Elaine. Investigations continued. Their stores slowly closed down. Their name, once printed on banners and gift boxes, faded away, just like they had faded from my life. And I didn't need revenge anymore. I had something better. I had freedom. I look back now, not with pain, but with power. The girl who was thrown into the rain became the woman who built a roof for others. And the family I thought I lost? I built a new one. One that chose me. One that stood by me. One that believed in me. This is my story. And I tell it not to reopen old wounds, but to remind anyone listening that the worst night of your life does not have to be the end. Sometimes, it's just the beginning. I thought my son's 12th birthday would be full of laughter and cake, but the moment he opened a gift from his grandmother, everything changed. Mom, I can't open my eyes, he screamed, then collapsed in my arms. My husband raced him to the emergency room. Hours later, we returned home. Only he wasn't alone. He brought police officers, and when they stepped inside our house, they found something none of us were prepared for. I guess I should start by saying that I never imagined my life would take such a turn, that my deepest fear would come true, and that someone I tried so hard to trust would betray me in the worst way possible. My name is Nina, and I'm 38 years old. I live in Austin, Texas, with my husband Eric, who's 40, and our 12-year-old son Liam. On the surface, we looked like a perfectly normal family, maybe even lucky, stable careers, a sweet son, a quiet life in a good neighborhood. But behind closed doors, there was a storm building. And for the longest time, I was the only one who could feel it coming. Eric and I have been married for over 14 years. We met in college. He was studying architecture, and I was studying computer science. I ended up working in software engineering, and he eventually opened a small but successful architectural firm downtown. Life was never fancy, but it was ours. When Liam was born, everything changed for the better, at least at first. He was the light of our world. He still is. What made our family different, though, was how small it was. I had no contact with my own parents. I won't get into every detail, but let's just say my childhood was rough. There was never any warmth, no safe place to fall. By the time I was old enough to leave, I did, and never looked back. So when Liam was born, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would give him everything I never had. Love, security, a home where he could always feel safe. That's where Eric's parents came in. Gloria and Harold. From the start, Harold was kind, soft-spoken, and calm. The kind of grandfather every child deserves. Gloria, on the other hand, well, she was a different story. At first, I thought she just had strong opinions. She was a retired schoolteacher, and she liked to act like she still ran a classroom. She always had something to say about everything: how I dressed Liam, what we fed him, what kind of books we read. And I could have dealt with all that, really. But the real problem started when Liam was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at age 6. The diagnosis changed everything. Our entire life had to be carefully managed. Liam needed insulin shots, regular blood sugar checks, scheduled meals. Nothing could be left to chance. I learned everything I could about the condition, and I made sure Liam understood too. He handled it like a champ. He was brave, curious, and mature beyond his years. But Gloria didn't see it that way. From the moment we told her, she dismissed it. "I don't believe in all that," she said the first time we tried to explain the treatment. "Kids these days are over-medicated. All he needs is a natural diet and some proper structure." I remember freezing in place when she said that, unsure whether to laugh or cry. But I calmly explained again, showing her doctor's notes and medical plans. She nodded, but I could see in her eyes she didn't take it seriously. And over time, it got worse. She started bringing food that wasn't part of Liam's diet, saying things like, "Just a little bite won't hurt," or "He needs to build a strong immune system, not rely on chemicals." It was infuriating. I talked to Eric about it dozens of times. He'd say, "She means well, Nina." She just doesn't understand. Dad won't let her cross the line. But I knew better. Gloria didn't just not understand. She refused to. She believed she was right, and everyone else was wrong. I started insisting that Gloria couldn't be alone with Liam. I'd make sure one of us was always there. But Eric didn't fully get it, not until much later. And part of me started to wonder if I was just being paranoid, overly protective. Then one day, I found out Gloria had actually skipped Liam's insulin dose while watching him for just 30 minutes. I lost it. I yelled. I cried. Eric promised it wouldn't happen again. Gloria gave me a smug little smile and said, "He looked just fine to me." After that, I kept my guard up every second. I couldn't trust her. But I also didn't want to break Liam's heart. He loved his grandparents, especially Harold. They were the only ones he had. And after everything I went through as a child, I didn't want to be the one to take that away from him. I tried to balance it all, keeping him safe without making him feel like he was caught in the middle. But the truth is, I was holding a bomb with a ticking clock. I just didn't know when it would explode. And then came Liam's 12th birthday. He was so excited. He'd been planning for months, video games, balloons, his favorite cupcakes from the bakery near our house. We invited a few close friends, some neighbors, and of course, Harold and Gloria. I wasn't exactly thrilled about her coming, but Liam wanted his grandparents there, so I agreed. I told myself we'd have eyes on everything. What could go wrong? That morning, everything started smoothly. Decorations went up, music played softly in the background, and Liam was grinning ear to ear. Around noon, Gloria showed up early. She had a large, covered dish in her hands and a strange look on her face. "I made something special for my boy," she said, walking past me and into the kitchen. I stared at the dish, my stomach twisting. "Gloria, we already have food planned. You didn't need to bring anything." "Oh, come on," she said with a tight smile. "This is healthy. Real food. Something he should be eating instead of all that sugary stuff." Before I could argue, Liam spotted her and ran over to hug her. "Grandma," he shouted. "You came early. I brought you something you'll love, sweetheart," she said sweetly, handing him the dish. "You'll thank me later." I stepped in, trying to keep my voice calm. "Liam, let's wait until after cake and presents, okay? We've got everything timed." But Gloria's eyes narrowed. "This isn't just a treat. It's medicine." I should have taken the dish away right then. I should have said no in front of everyone. But Liam looked so happy. And Harold was there, watching everything quietly. So I let it go. Just for now, I told myself. Just until after the cake. If only I had known what was really inside that dish. If only I had trusted my gut, not my guilt. But by the time I realized what Gloria had done, it was already too late. The moment Liam lifted the lid off that dish, something inside me screamed. I couldn't explain it, just a gut punch of dread, like I was watching a scene in slow motion. He looked up at Gloria, smiling, completely trusting her. "What is it?" he asked, curious. "Just taste it," Gloria replied, brushing a hand through his hair like she hadn't just spent years ignoring everything we told her about his condition. "It's a surprise." I stood there, frozen. I opened my mouth to stop him, but Liam was already dipping a spoon in, excited to please his grandma. "Come on, Mom," he said, half laughing. "It smells pretty good." I took one step forward. "Liam, wait." But he had already taken a bite. I will never forget the sound of the spoon clinking against the side of the dish. It's etched into my mind like a warning bell I'll never unhear. At first, nothing happened. He smiled, chewing, and I almost let myself breathe again. But then, not even a full minute later, his expression changed. His hands trembled. His smile dropped. "Mom," he whispered, "I feel weird." And just like that, everything collapsed. He stumbled backward, and I caught him before he hit the floor. His skin was ice cold, and I could feel how quickly his body was losing strength. "His sugar's crashing," I yelled. "Get the emergency kit. Now." Eric rushed over, grabbing the glucose shot from Liam's backpack while I tried to keep Liam awake. His lips were turning pale, and his eyes fluttered like he was fighting to stay with us. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear myself. "We've got you." Harold moved fast too. He was already calling 911 while guests stood stunned, some crying, others covering their mouths. It was like the entire party had suddenly gone underwater, muffled by panic. Eric injected the glucose, and after a few agonizing seconds, Liam's breathing steadied slightly, but he was still barely responsive. I held him tighter than I ever had before. When the paramedics arrived, everything turned into chaos. People moved aside as they loaded Liam onto a stretcher. I barely registered anyone else's face. I rode in the ambulance, gripping his hand, not letting go for a second. At the hospital, doctors and nurses rushed around him, hooking him up to machines, checking his vitals, working fast. Eric came in a few minutes later, pale and shaken. "Is he going to be okay?" he asked the nurse. "It was a close call," she said. "If you hadn't acted as quickly as you did, this could have been much worse." I wanted to scream, to cry, to collapse. But all I could do was sit beside Liam's bed and wait for him to wake up. About an hour later, the doctor came in and said they'd stabilized him, but he needed to be monitored overnight. That's when Eric and I finally had a moment to speak, really speak. He turned to me slowly, his voice low and full of something I hadn't heard before. Pure rage. "What did she give him?" he asked. I shook my head. "I don't know. I didn't get to check it before he took a bite." Without a word, Eric stormed out of the room. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where he was going. He called me an hour later. "Nina," he said, voice tight, "you were right. It was full of barley and some kind of herbal mix, stuff that spikes blood sugar. And get this. She told me she thought it would reset his system if his body reacted to it." I couldn't breathe. She did this on purpose? She thinks she was helping. She said the chemicals we're using are more dangerous than anything in her dish. She still believes she was right. That night, in that cold hospital room, I sat by Liam's bed and stared at the wall for hours. I thought about how many chances we had given her, how many times we'd warned her, and how little she cared. When Liam finally opened his eyes, weak and scared, he clutched my hand. "Is Grandma coming back?" he asked in a soft, hoarse voice. I hesitated, brushing his hair back gently. "No, baby," I said. "Not anymore."
He didn't ask why.
He just nodded, closed his eyes, and went back to sleep. The next morning, while Liam was resting, Eric and I sat outside his room, emotionally drained. Harold came in with coffee and sat quietly beside us. "I want you to know," he said softly. "I didn't know what she had planned. I would have never let her do that." "We know," Eric replied, his voice cracking. "But we can't let her near him again." Harold nodded. "I agree. And I'm going to file for divorce. This has gone too far." It felt surreal. I never thought I'd hear those words from Harold. But I also never thought Gloria would go this far. When we got home later that day, everything felt different. I could still see the balloons tied to the porch railing, the banner that said, "Happy 12th birthday, Liam," swaying in the breeze. The leftover cake sat untouched in the fridge. I wanted to throw it all away. Every reminder. Every trace. Eric and I sat down that night, no lights on, just the hum of the fridge and the silence between us. "She'll try to spin this," I said quietly. "She always finds a way." "She already is," Eric replied. "She called me 3 times. Left messages saying she was only trying to help. That you're making her look bad. That I've turned against my own mother." My blood boiled. This isn't just a family argument, Eric. She put our son in danger. She broke every boundary we set. "I know," he said. "That's why I called the police." I looked at him in surprise. "I reported it," he continued. "The doctors are backing us. We have witnesses from the party. We're pressing charges." I felt my breath catch in my throat. "Do you think they'll actually arrest her?" "If they don't," he said, "I'll take it to court myself. I swear on Liam's life." He wasn't just hurt, he was done. I could see it in his eyes. And I knew then, this wasn't just about protecting Liam anymore. This was about making sure Gloria faced the consequences. Because next time, there might not be a second chance. The The following days felt like walking through smoke, unreal, thick with tension, impossible to breathe freely. Liam was home, safe, but still quiet and pale. He barely spoke unless we asked him something, and even then his answers were short. He didn't smile, not even at his favorite video game. Every time the doorbell rang or the phone buzzed, he jumped. That made it real for me, more than anything else. My little boy, who used to laugh at everything, now looked over his shoulder like the world wasn't safe anymore. Eric stayed home from work for the week. Neither of us could focus on anything else. We spent most of our time with Liam, but in the background, the legal side of everything was moving fast. Gloria hadn't just crossed a line, she'd obliterated it. The hospital had filed a report. The police had taken our statements. Witnesses from the party gave theirs too. Even the paramedics testified about the condition Liam was in when they arrived. It was more than enough to build a case. The call finally came in one quiet morning. I had just sat down to make Liam some oatmeal when Eric answered the phone. His voice was calm, but his expression wasn't. "She's been arrested," he told me as soon as he hung up. I stared at him, spoon in hand. Just like that. "She's being charged with endangering a minor. They took her into custody half an hour ago." A strange feeling washed over me. Not joy, not relief. Just quiet justice. Like something that should have happened a long time ago was finally set in motion. Later that day, Harold came by. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, like the weight of the last week had aged him overnight. He sat with Liam for a while, reading to him from a book they both loved. Then he came to the kitchen and sat across from me and Eric. "I delivered the divorce papers this morning," he said, his voice heavy. "I told her it's over. That I won't support what she did. That I'm done defending the indefensible." Was she surprised? I asked. He nodded. More like furious. "She said I betrayed her. That you manipulated us. That this family turned against her for no reason." I clenched my jaw. No reason. She doesn't see it that way, Nina. She still believes she was right. Eric leaned forward. "And now she'll see a judge who doesn't care what she believes." But it didn't end there. A few days later, we received a letter. Handwritten, full of messy scrawl and venom. Gloria had mailed it from jail. She ranted about betrayal, called me names, accused me of brainwashing Eric and turning Liam against her. The letter ended with a threat. "I'll get my rights in court. A judge will let me see my grandson. You'll regret this. All of you." I tore the letter in half and threw it in the trash. "I'm not afraid of her anymore," I told Eric. "Good," he said, "because we're not letting her anywhere near us again." But still, I couldn't shake the fear. What if the judge gave her visitation? What if somehow, after everything, she found a way back into Liam's life? Our lawyer reassured us. "With the evidence you've provided, along with the restraining order, she has no legal grounds. Grandparents' rights don't apply when the grandparent is a danger to the child's well-being." We filed the restraining order that same day. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a shield. A line in the sand. Meanwhile, we enrolled Liam in therapy. He needed someone he could talk to who wasn't us, someone trained to help him process everything he'd gone through. At first, he didn't say much in the sessions, but little by little, he started opening up. He talked about how scared he was when he collapsed. How confused he felt when his grandma smiled at him, even though he was hurting. How he didn't understand why someone who said they loved him would make him sick. It broke my heart, but it also reminded me why we were doing this, why we had to follow through to the end. A few weeks later, Gloria's hearing came. We didn't attend in person, but our lawyer represented us. The evidence was clear, the testimony strong, and her attitude in custody didn't help her case. She showed no remorse, only bitterness. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail and ordered to pay Liam's medical bills. But her finances were a mess, and it was doubtful we'd ever see that money. That wasn't the point anyway. The point was she wouldn't be coming back. After the sentencing, something inside our house shifted. The air felt lighter. Liam laughed a little more. Eric and I started sleeping better. We even went out for dinner one night, just the three of us, and it almost felt normal again. Harold stayed close, more involved than ever. He helped Liam with homework, took him to bookstores, even taught him how to play chess. He apologized often, even when we told him he didn't need to. "You didn't do this, Harold," I said one evening when he got quiet. "You're the one who helped us through it." He nodded but didn't say anything. I knew he was grieving too in a different way. Losing a marriage, realizing the person you spent decades with was capable of hurting their own grandchild, that wasn't easy. But we were all healing. Slowly, together. And just when I thought we could finally close the chapter for good, we got another letter. This one from Gloria's lawyer. A formal notice. She was appealing the case. Still claiming she had a right to see Liam. It felt like a punch to the gut. I stared at the letter, my hands shaking, and for a brief moment, fear came rushing back in. But then I looked at Liam, sitting at the table drawing. Peaceful. Safe. And I knew, no matter what came next, I'd never let her near him again. Not now. Not ever. I stood there staring at that letter, every word feeling like a slap in the face. After everything Gloria had done, after nearly killing my son, after the arrest, the hearing, and even the sentencing, she still hadn't stopped. She was appealing the case, demanding visitation rights to see Liam. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Eric took the letter from my hands and read it silently, his jaw tightening more with each line. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he finally did, his voice was flat. "She's delusional." I nodded, too tired to even cry. It's like she doesn't get it. Or refuses to. She doesn't care what she did. She just wants control, he said. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about what could happen if somehow, by some twisted loophole, she got her way. I kept picturing her walking through our front door again, Liam freezing up, his whole body tensing like it had that day in the hospital. I couldn't let that happen. Not again. Not ever. Our lawyer responded to the appeal immediately. He assured us that the court had already made a clear ruling and Gloria's chances were slim to none. But we were advised to prepare just in case, to keep all documentation updated, records of therapy, medical expenses, Liam's emotional recovery, everything. I gathered every file, every photo, every doctor's note, and stacked them into neat folders like armor. Through all this, Liam was getting better. He smiled more, laughed at jokes again. He even asked to go back to soccer practice. I watched him from the stands, running across the field with his friends, the sunlight on his face, and I felt something I hadn't in months. Hope. But I still hadn't told him about Gloria's appeal. I didn't want to put that weight on him. Then one afternoon, as we were walking home from practice, he looked up at me and asked, "She's not coming back, right?" I stopped, my heart sinking. "What makes you ask that, sweetie?" "I don't know," he said, kicking a rock on the sidewalk. "Just a feeling. Sometimes I dream about her showing up again. I hate it." I knelt down, meeting his eyes. "Listen to me, Liam. Your dad and I are doing everything we can to make sure she never gets close to you again. And no matter what happens, we're on your side. You're safe. I promise." He nodded slowly, and I saw the fear in his eyes ease just a little. The appeal hearing came quickly. Eric and I attended this one in person. The courtroom was quiet, cold, and too familiar. Gloria sat at the other end, in a stiff gray suit, her expression unreadable. She didn't even look at us. The judge asked questions. Our lawyer answered calmly and clearly. He brought out the documentation, medical records, photos from the hospital, written testimony from the doctors, the therapists. The judge reviewed everything silently, then looked up at Gloria. "Do you have anything to say?" She stood, hands shaking slightly. "I love my grandson," she said. "I only ever tried to help him. My daughter-in-law has twisted everything. She made me the villain. I don't deserve to be cut out of his life." I watched her speak, and all I could think was how she still didn't understand the damage she caused. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were dry. Not once did she apologize. Not once did she show real regret. The judge paused for a long moment before speaking. "The court finds no reason to reverse the previous ruling. The restraining order remains in place. The visitation request is denied. This case is closed." I let out a breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. Eric reached for my hand under the table and squeezed it. It was over. Really over. Gloria didn't say a word as she left the courtroom. Just walked out with her lawyer trailing behind her, her face hard like stone. No one followed. No one stopped her. She was alone. In the weeks that followed, the quiet finally settled in for good. No more letters, no more calls, no more threats. She had finally accepted defeat, or maybe just run out of ways to fight. Either way, she was gone from our lives. Liam continued therapy and was doing better every day. He asked fewer questions about the past and focused more on his hobbies. He started sketching again, something he used to love before everything happened. We framed one of his drawings and hung it in the hallway. It was a picture of a lion standing in front of a small cub, teeth bared, guarding it from a shadowy figure. He said it was just a drawing, but I knew exactly what it meant. As for Harold, he stayed a part of our lives. He came over every Sunday for dinner, picked Liam up from school sometimes, and always made sure we knew he was grateful for our forgiveness, for our trust, for our family. He said losing Gloria had hurt, but losing us would have destroyed him. And I believed him. Now, when I think back on everything, I don't feel anger as much as I feel clarity. I tried for years to keep the peace, to keep the family whole, to give Liam the loving support system I never had. But I learned the hard way that some people don't want peace, they want power. And if you let them in too far, they'll use love as a weapon. So we built new boundaries. Strong ones. And we never looked back. Liam is growing into someone strong, smart, and kind. And we will protect that with everything we have. Eric and I were no longer just parents. We're guardians of something sacred. Our son, our peace, and the family we chose to be. On my wedding day, my own mother slapped me in the bridal suite when I refused to give her $50,000. Minutes later, she stormed out and accused me of having secret affairs. Then my fiancé stood up and made an announcement. Everyone was stunned. But after 10 minutes, if someone had told me that my wedding day, the day I had dreamed about for years, would turn into a nightmare before I even walked down the aisle, I would have laughed. But here I am, telling you this not as a bride glowing in joy, but as a woman who found her strength in the middle of heartbreak and betrayal. My name is Sarah Bennett. I'm 28 years old and I own a small but successful fashion boutique in Los Angeles. I've spent most of my adult life building my business from scratch, designing clothes, working late nights, sacrificing weekends, all to create something that was mine. I've always been independent, maybe too much so for my mother's liking. I was never the daughter she wanted, not obedient enough, not grateful enough, not dependent enough. My mother, Martha Bennett, is 55, unemployed for years, and bitter in ways I can't even begin to explain. I grew up hearing about all the things she gave up for me, all the dreams she lost because of me. She reminded me of them constantly, as if I were a burden she couldn't put down. Still, I tried. I paid her bills, bought her groceries, sent her money whenever she needed. Not out of guilt, out of love. Because even when someone hurts you, it's hard to stop loving them when they're your mother. My fiancé, Daniel, is the opposite of everything my mother is. He's 30, grounded, patient, and the kind of man who listens even when I don't have the words. He's been by my side for 4 years, 4 steady, solid years. When he proposed last spring, I cried not just because I loved him, but because it felt like for the first time in my life, I was safe. We spent months planning the wedding. I chose the venue myself, a stunning rooftop garden in downtown LA, overlooking the skyline. It felt like something out of a movie, the way the sunlight poured through the glass panels, the way the city buzzed quietly below. It was perfect. Or so I thought. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early. My nerves were a mess, but in the best way. I remember looking at my reflection in the mirror, wearing the silk robe my best friend gave me, and thinking, this is it. Today, everything changes. I didn't realize how right I was. I was in the bridal suite, having my hair done, when the door creaked open. My mom stepped in. She was dressed in navy blue, her makeup flawless, her face unreadable. "Can we talk?" she asked, and the room quieted. My stylist gave me a quick glance and slipped out, closing the door behind her. Martha walked over and sat across from me, crossing her legs slowly, like she was preparing for a business meeting. I've done a lot for you, Sarah, she began, her voice calm but sharp. More than you'll ever understand. I gave up my life for you. I didn't say anything. I knew where this was heading. You're about to marry into comfort. That man adores you. Your business is doing well. So now it's time you give back. My stomach twisted. Mom, what are you talking about? I want $50,000. As a thank you. Call it repayment. I blinked. You're asking for money? Today. It's the least you can do, she snapped. You wouldn't be standing here if it weren't for me. I shook my head. I'm not giving you that money, Mom. I'm not buying your love. Not today. Not ever. What happened next felt like a blur, and yet every second burned into my skin. Her hand shot up and cracked against my cheek.
Hard.
It wasn't just a slap. It was years of resentment hitting me all at once. I didn't even cry. I just sat there in silence, stunned, my face stinging, my heart cracking. She stood, straightened her dress, and said, "If you won't give me what I deserve, then maybe Daniel deserves to know the truth about you." What truth? I asked, my voice hoarse. You'll see, she muttered before walking out the door. I sat there for a moment, my reflection staring back at me, cheeks flushed from more than just makeup. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. I tried to compose myself, reapply lipstick, fix the smudged mascara, but my hands were shaking. Then I heard the commotion. It started with gasps, then murmurs, then a friend rushing into the room saying, "Sarah, something's going on out there. Your mom, she's saying things." I stood up, legs wobbling beneath me. When I stepped into the hallway, I could already hear her voice echoing through the venue. "She's not who you think she is," Martha shouted. "Ask her about her past. Ask her who she's really been with. You think she's clean? Think again." People turned to look at me as I emerged.
Guests. Friends.
Family. All staring. Some confused, some whispering, some just frozen. I couldn't move. I felt like my feet were stuck to the floor. And then, from across the room, Daniel appeared. He pushed through the crowd, eyes locked on mine. He walked up to me, wrapped his arm gently around my shoulder, and turned to face everyone. "Enough," he said firmly, voice steady. "I know Sarah. I know everything about her. And I trust her with my life." Martha tried to interrupt, but Daniel cut her off. "You want to talk about the past? Let's talk about how you've taken money from her for years. Let's talk about how you tried to control her with guilt and threats. Let's talk about the real truth." Silence fell. Martha's face dropped. For once, she had no words. Daniel turned to me and whispered, "You okay?" I nodded, still shaking. "Then let's get married," he said. And somehow, I took his hand and followed him to the altar. But what came next would change everything. Not just that day, but my whole life. Walking down that aisle, my hand in Daniel's, felt surreal. The room was still buzzing from what had just happened. My mother's public meltdown, the ugly accusations, the slap, the tension in the air. But Daniel held me steady. I could feel the strength in his grip, not forcing me forward, just guiding me. Standing beside him gave me the courage to keep going. I didn't look at anyone else. I couldn't. If I did, I might have collapsed under the weight of the stairs. The ceremony itself was a blur. I heard the words, but my mind was floating somewhere between disbelief and heartbreak. I had imagined this moment for so long, how I would feel, how I would smile, how I might cry tears of happiness. But now, everything was different. The flowers still bloomed. The music still played. The officiant still spoke. But a wound had opened inside me that I didn't know how to close. And yet, as we said our vows and Daniel looked into my eyes with nothing but love and loyalty, I realized that this day, though scarred, still held beauty. He had chosen me, knowing everything, seeing everything. And he had not stepped back. He had stepped closer. After the ceremony, we kept the reception short. The mood was strained, and people weren't sure what to say or how to act. Some guests left early, clearly uncomfortable. Others came up to me quietly, offering hugs and whispered words like, "You're so brave," or "I'm so sorry that happened." I just nodded. I didn't have the energy to respond to everyone. Martha had disappeared after Daniel's speech. She didn't stay for the vows. She didn't try to explain herself. Part of me was relieved. Another part of me was scared because I knew she wasn't done. She never just walks away. She waits, then strikes harder when you least expect it. The day after the wedding, I woke up with swollen eyes and a heavy chest. I sat in our hotel room, staring at the skyline of Los Angeles through the glass window, wondering what I was supposed to feel. Grateful? Devastated? Angry? Daniel came and sat beside me, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me and kissed the top of my head. "You were amazing yesterday," he said softly. I didn't feel amazing. "You were," he insisted. "You stood your ground. And I'm proud of you." I nodded, sipping the coffee, letting the warmth settle in my hands. After a few moments of silence, I finally said it. "I don't think I can keep her in my life." He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at me with those calm eyes that always made me feel seen. "You don't have to," he said. "Not anymore." That's when I broke down. All those years of pretending it was okay, convincing myself that maybe she'd change, maybe one day she'd love me the way I needed. All of that shattered. "I've given her everything," I whispered. "And it's never been enough. She's always wanted more." Daniel reached over and wrapped his arms around me. "Then it's time you take something back." Those words stuck with me. Later that week, I began going through old records. Bank transfers, credit card bills, anything that could trace where my money had gone over the past few years. I already knew she had borrowed money regularly. But what I hadn't realized until I looked closer was how much she had taken without asking. Cards in my name that I didn't remember authorizing. Charges for things I never bought. Cash withdrawals on joint accounts I didn't even use anymore. It added up fast, thousands and thousands of dollars. Quiet theft. Slow bleeding. Years of emotional manipulation backed by financial abuse. I called a lawyer. Her name was Claire Holloway. She was smart, direct, and didn't waste time sugarcoating anything. "This is a strong case," she said after reviewing the documents. "It won't be easy, emotionally. But legally, you have grounds for a claim of financial exploitation, especially since your mother has no income and has been living off your support." I nodded. "I don't want revenge. I just want peace. I want my life back." Claire smiled gently. "Then let's take the first step." Filing the paperwork was like taking my first deep breath in weeks. It wasn't about punishing my mother.
It was about protecting myself.
About drawing a line and saying, "This far, no further." Daniel stood by me the entire time. He handled the legal fees, came to every meeting, listened when I ranted, held me when I cried. I'd never felt more supported, more loved. And slowly I began to heal. But of course, it didn't end quietly. A few days after the papers were filed, I got a voicemail from my mother. "How dare you take this to court? After all I've done for you? You're ungrateful. You'll regret this." I didn't call back. Then came the messages from extended family. Cousins and aunts who barely knew me suddenly wanted to give their opinion. "She's still your mother. She made mistakes, but don't destroy her. This is family business. Don't air it in court." But I had made my choice. And this time, I wasn't backing down. The court date was set. The evidence was clear. And even though part of me still trembled at the thought of facing her again, I knew I had to do it. Because silence had cost me too much already. The day of the court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I kept telling myself I was ready, but the moment I stepped into that courtroom, 1,000 old memories came flooding back. The kind where you feel small, like a child again, scared, unheard, and always at fault. But this time, I wasn't alone. Daniel walked beside me, his hand resting gently on my back, steadying me without saying a word. Claire, my lawyer, was already waiting for us, calm and composed as always. She gave me a nod that said, "We've got this." Then I saw her. My mother sat across the room, dressed in a dark blazer and fake pearls, her expression cold and distant. No guilt, no shame, just the same unreadable face she had worn all my life when she wanted to act like she'd done nothing wrong. When she caught my eye, she didn't look away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, as if daring me to go through with it. I looked back at Daniel. "She's going to lie," I whispered.
She always has, he said.
"But not this time. You've got proof." He was right. We had everything: bank statements, emails, records of unauthorized withdrawals, even a voice message where she admitted taking my money and claiming she deserved it. Claire said it was more than enough. The hearing began. Claire stood first, presenting our case with firm confidence. She explained how, over the course of several years, my mother had taken thousands of dollars from me, some borrowed, most stolen. She emphasized the emotional pressure, the way I had been conditioned to believe that giving in to my mother's demands was normal, even expected. Then it was my turn. I stood before the judge, my palms sweaty, but my voice didn't shake. I told the truth. Not just the facts, but how it felt, how it started with small things. Gaslighting. Guilt trips. "You owe me," she would say, "after everything I've done." I told the court how it escalated to financial abuse, unauthorized credit cards, forced gifts, fake emergencies. I spoke about the wedding day, the slap, the humiliation, and how it was the breaking point. I looked straight at the judge and said, "I didn't come here to destroy my mother. I came here to stop her from destroying me." There was a pause in the room, heavy silence, and for once, no one interrupted me. No one tried to silence me. I was being heard. Then her lawyer stood. He painted a very different picture. According to him, Martha was a struggling single mother who had simply leaned on her daughter for help. He claimed I had given the money willingly and that I was now twisting the narrative to hurt her out of spite. And then, as if she'd been holding it in the whole time, my mother stood and addressed the court herself. "She was never grateful," she said, her voice rising. "I gave up everything for her, and this is how she thanks me? Dragging me through court like some criminal?" She turned toward me, her eyes narrow. "You're still that same selfish girl who always thought she was better than me." I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. The judge raised a hand to quiet the room. He reviewed the evidence quietly for what felt like hours. Then he spoke. "Based on the financial documents, the statements provided, and the recorded messages, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Sarah Bennett. The defendant, Martha Bennett, is ordered to repay the misappropriated funds in the amount of $32,000 and is barred from accessing any accounts or assets in Sarah Bennett's name." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It was done. When we stepped out of the courthouse, the air felt different. Lighter. I looked up at the sky and felt like, for the first time in years, I could breathe freely. Daniel took my hand and smiled. "You did it." "No," I said, looking at him. "We did it." But even as I said it, part of me still ached. Winning in court didn't erase the years of damage. It didn't give me back the childhood I lost or the countless nights I cried into my pillow, wondering what I had done to make my own mother treat me that way. It didn't make the slap disappear or erase the cruel things she shouted on my wedding day. What it gave me was something different, something stronger. It gave me the power to say no more. I cut off all contact after that, blocked her number, changed my emergency contacts, moved forward without the weight of her presence dragging me down. Some relatives still tried to meddle. "She's your mother. She raised you." She must have been desperate. But desperation doesn't excuse cruelty. And blood doesn't give anyone the right to break you. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I had made peace with my decision. I wasn't running from my past anymore. I was finally walking toward my future. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with fireworks. It comes quietly, like a deep exhale after years of holding your breath. That's how it felt when everything finally settled, after the court, after the messages stopped, after the noise died down. I remember waking up the morning after the hearing, lying next to Daniel in our small apartment, and realizing for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. There were no texts waiting to guilt-trip me, no unexpected calls demanding something, no looming sense of being watched or judged. Just stillness. And it felt incredible. We didn't have a honeymoon, not right away. The wedding had drained us emotionally, and the court case added another layer of exhaustion. But instead of traveling, we spent time making our space feel more like home. We redecorated. Daniel painted the walls a soft, calming blue, and I filled the rooms with flowers from the shop I used to pass by every morning, but never had time to enter. It was the first time I had made choices without considering whether my mother would approve. Every corner, every pillow, every framed picture was mine. Ours, not hers. Daniel and I grew closer after everything. There's something about going through chaos together that either breaks you or binds you. For us, it did the latter. He never once asked me to reconsider my decision. He never played devil's advocate or questioned whether I was being too harsh. He understood, deeply, that this was something I needed to do, not out of hate, but out of love for myself. One night, a few weeks after the court ruling, we sat out on our small balcony, watching the lights of Los Angeles flicker in the distance. The air was warm, and Eli, our neighbor's cat who'd adopted us, curled up at our feet. Daniel looked at me and said, "Do you regret it?" I didn't have to think.
No.
I regret not doing it sooner. He nodded. You were protecting her for a long time. I leaned my head against his shoulder. I was protecting the version of her I wished existed. That was the truth. For years, I held on to this fantasy that one day my mother would soften, that she'd apologize, that she'd look at me and finally see me for who I was instead of who she wanted me to be. But the older I got, the more I realized that hoping for someone to change doesn't mean they will. And it's not our job to keep bleeding for people who keep cutting us. There were days I still grieved. Not for her, but for the kind of mother-daughter relationship I'd never have. The kind I'd seen in movies or glimpsed between my friends and their moms. The ones who called just to say, "I'm proud of you," or who brought soup when you were sick or helped zip up your wedding dress with tears in their eyes. But grief and growth live side by side. And as painful as it was, walking away allowed me to heal in ways I never thought possible. I reopened my boutique a month later with a quiet relaunch. I changed the name from Bennett & Company to something that felt more like me, Threaded Roots. It was symbolic. A reminder that no matter where I came from, I had the power to weave something new, something mine. Customers returned, slowly at first, then more steadily. Business picked up. I even got a chance to work with a local fashion magazine for a spring feature. Life didn't just move on, it blossomed. Then one afternoon, while sorting through new fabric samples, I got a letter. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My mother's. I stood there for a long time just staring at it. My heart raced. My palms went cold. I didn't want to open it, but I did. It wasn't an apology. It was more of the same. She blamed me for everything, said I humiliated her, that I made her look like a villain in front of the world, that I destroyed the family's name. She called me ungrateful and heartless. And at the end, she added, "You'll regret this someday, when no one's left to love you." I folded the letter, walked to the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash. Then I returned to my work, a sketch of a summer dress half-finished on the table, and smiled. That letter was proof of something I had already known but maybe needed to see in writing. She hadn't changed. And I had made the right decision. Later that night, I told Daniel about it. He didn't say much, just pulled me close and said, "You don't need her to be whole." He was right. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't that girl in the bridal suite, stunned and shaking after a slap. I wasn't the daughter who gave and gave, hoping to be enough. I was Sarah Bennett, strong, free, and finally fully myself. And that was the best revenge of all. Not bitterness. Not anger. Just peace. The kind that can't be taken. Not even by the person who gave you life. Not everything needs ambition, my mother said as my sister showed off her latest investor pitch. I just smiled. Less than 24 hours later, their $90 million deal hit a wall, one signature short.
Mine.
They never saw me coming. But when I entered the room, everything changed. I've learned that sometimes the best way to be seen is to first let people believe you're invisible. For 12 years, I played my part well, quiet, helpful, forgettable. Just the assistant, the one who fetched coffee, took notes, and smiled politely while others claimed the spotlight. But what no one knew, not my family, not my colleagues, not even my younger sister, was that I was never just the assistant. I was the one building the foundation beneath them all. My name is Riley Monroe, and this is the story of how I built an empire behind closed doors, and why I had to. It started the way a lot of painful stories do, with family. The Monroe family was known in Seattle for money, for fashion, and for being difficult. My mother, Cassandra Monroe, once ran one of the city's biggest fashion empires before retiring early, still sharp as a blade and twice as cold. To the world, she was elegant and composed. To me, she was impossible to please. My younger sister, Bianca, was her golden child, smart, flashy, always ahead of the curve. She launched a tech startup at 23, and by 27, she was on the cover of some business magazine, holding a phone like she'd invented the damn thing. And then there was me. I'd graduated from Stanford Business School with a plan I believed in deeply. A model for helping failing businesses restructure and thrive. I'd stayed up nights refining it, adjusting it, making sure it could stand up to the toughest boardrooms. When I came home that summer, excited to pitch it to the family, I thought maybe for once, they'd take me seriously. I remembered that dinner like a wound. I sat at the long marble table in my mother's Lakeview estate, explaining my idea while Cassandra sipped wine and Bianca scrolled through her phone. Restructure failing companies? Cassandra had said, barely hiding a smirk. Darling, you're not a Wall Street shark. You're too sensitive for that world. Bianca didn't even look up. Why not just come work for me? She offered. I need someone to manage admin stuff. It's perfect for you.
Perfect.
That night, I cried in my car for an hour, parked just beyond the gate of that mansion, listening to the wind whip off the lake. And then I made a decision. If my family couldn't see what I was capable of, I'd show them, but not right away.
Not yet.
I took my savings, everything I had, and found a tiny, dusty loft above a failing used bookstore in the Fremont district. It had squeaky floors, terrible plumbing, and one flickering light in the hallway. But it was mine. I registered the name Novacore Strategies and started building. At first, it was just me and a laptop. I worked 16 hours a day, surviving on takeout and cheap coffee. My first client was a struggling logistics company, barely hanging on. No one else would touch them. I studied their numbers, met their employees, and found what was broken. 3 months later, they were not only surviving, they were hiring again. Word spread. I hired slowly, carefully. I looked for people who were smart, discreet, and had something to prove. People like Ava, a brilliant analyst who had been turned down by 3 firms because she didn't fit the culture. We shared a bond, both underestimated, both hungry to prove everyone wrong. Every employee signed strict NDAs. My name was kept off public filings. To the outside world, I was just the office assistant, the quiet woman who scheduled meetings and ordered supplies. It was the perfect cover. My family never asked questions. When Cassandra or Bianca would call, rarely, it was always the same tone. Dismissive. Curious about others, never about me. I kept it that way. I let them believe I had settled. Because I knew something they didn't. Sometimes, silence is power. The years passed. Novacore grew faster than I ever imagined. We expanded to 10 cities. We helped turn around companies on the edge of collapse, restaurants, tech firms, shipping companies. We became known in the shadows as the firm you called when you had no hope left. And always I stayed hidden. Every Christmas, every birthday, every forced family gathering, I played the role. I smiled. I poured wine. I listened to Bianca brag about her rising app valuation while Cassandra looked on with pride. And they never once suspected that the assistant sitting quietly in the corner ran a company that had already surpassed Bianca's in revenue 2 years earlier. Then came the Monroe Family Gala. It was always a spectacle, held each spring at the estate, full of guests, lights, and enough champagne to drown a boat. That year was no different, except something inside me had started to shift. 12 years of biting my tongue, of letting them believe I was small, had begun to burn. I wore a plain black dress, like always, slipped into the room without drawing attention. Cassandra floated across the floor in her signature silver gown, greeting guests like royalty. Bianca arrived late, as usual, in a sparkling red number, her phone in one hand and a handsome investor in the other. "Oh look," Bianca said loudly as I approached the bar. "Seattle's most dedicated assistant is here." Cassandra laughed lightly. "Still fetching coffee, Riley? You know, I keep telling you, darling, you're wasting your best years hiding behind a desk." I smiled behind my glass. "Some of us prefer to work behind the scenes." "Well," Bianca said, already half turned away, "when you're ready to be part of something real, let me know. I'm hiring again." I nodded and said nothing, because what I had built was far more real than anything Bianca could imagine. And soon they were about to find out. What I didn't expect was how soon. Ava called me 2 days later. "You're going to want to see this," she said. "Blake Tech just reached out. They're being pressured into a merger by a group led by Monroe Ventures." My stomach twisted. Monroe Ventures was Cassandra's legacy. Bianca had taken over its business development arm last year. "Do they know who we are?"
I asked.
Ava laughed softly.
No.
"Not yet." I stared out the window of my corner office. Yes, the one on the top floor of NovaCore's glass and steel headquarters. My reflection looked calm, but inside, something ignited. This wasn't just another client anymore. It was personal. The moment I learned Monroe Ventures was behind the Blake Tech takeover attempt, everything inside me went still, sharp, focused. After all these years, my mother and sister had finally wandered into my territory, and they had no idea. For more than a decade, I'd been protecting companies from the very kind of corporate predation they practiced. Now, the next company on their hit list had come straight to me. I didn't hesitate. I flew to San Diego the next day, met with Blake Tech's board, and walked them through a survival strategy. They were bleeding money due to a failed product launch and were terrified of a buyout. I showed them how to restructure without firing half their staff, cut unnecessary contracts, and rebuild their reputation. Within 4 months, their stock price had risen over 50%. Investors returned. Monroe Ventures' offer began to look desperate. Still, they pushed. They had a merger meeting scheduled with what they thought was the executive team of NovaCore, completely unaware that I would be in the room, not as their assistant, but as the decision-maker. The one they had always overlooked. I didn't tell anyone in my family that I'd be there. I wanted to see their faces when they realized who they were really dealing with. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Ava worked overtime organizing data, contracts, and client portfolios. "Are you sure you want to reveal yourself now?" she asked one night as we sat in my office, well past midnight. The city lights of Seattle twinkled outside the glass walls. "I'm sure," I told her. "They've been walking around like queens of the market, thinking no one could ever touch them. It's time someone did." "Then you better wear something terrifying," she joked, handing me a file. "Bianca hates anything navy. Makes her feel washed out." I smiled. Navy it is. The morning of the meeting, I arrived early, walking through NovaCore's private entrance. It felt surreal to step into that building, not as the woman who ordered catering and managed everyone's schedules, but as the architect of it all. I passed employees who still didn't know my real role, nodding as they whispered, "Good morning." Only a select few, like Ava, knew the truth. "They're here," Ava said, waiting by the elevator with her tablet in hand. "Your mother looks annoyed, and your sister is already trying to flirt with a receptionist." "Perfect," I said, smoothing the lines of my suit. "Let's give them something to talk about." I waited until exactly 9 a.m. before stepping into the conference room. The moment I opened the doors, the room fell silent. My mother was seated at the far end of the long table, legs crossed, wearing that same cold smirk she'd worn my entire life. Bianca sat to her left, scrolling through her phone as always. There were 2 Monroe Ventures advisors there too, looking thoroughly unimpressed. Bianca glanced up first, frowning. "Riley, Did someone call in catering? I thought this was a CEO-level meeting. I don't serve coffee anymore, I said calmly, walking to the head of the table. And this is a CEO-level meeting. You're looking at her. The room went still. Cassandra slowly removed her sunglasses. What game are you playing? No game, I said, placing my hand on the back of the chair at the head. I'm Riley Monroe, founder and CEO of Novacore Strategies. You? Bianca blinked, confused. That's impossible. You worked reception. I built this company from nothing, I continued, starting in a dusty attic above a bookstore while you were busy playing Tech Princess and Mom was too busy calling my business plan a fantasy. I took my seat. Now, Novacore holds assets worth $87 billion. And your merger proposal? It's on my desk. I let Ava hand out the printed financials. One of the advisors began flipping through pages, his face turning pale. We've been saving companies from vultures like Monroe Ventures for years, I said. Companies like Metro Ship Logistics, Green Star Farms, Blake Tech. You tried to take them. We saved them. You've been sabotaging our deals, my mother said, voice low and sharp. No, I replied evenly. I've been helping companies survive. If that interfered with your plans, well, maybe you should have done your homework. Bianca slammed her tablet shut. This is blackmail. This is business, I corrected. You have until 3 p.m. to agree to our merger terms, which include Novacore acquiring a controlling interest in Monroe Ventures private holdings. If you don't sign, we begin buying shares tomorrow on the open market. Your investors will panic. And I'll be there waiting. Ava stepped forward with a final document. Also, she said, placing it in front of Bianca, we're releasing internal communications from your company. Emails mocking Riley, questioning her intelligence. Board memos calling her unfit for leadership. Bianca's face turned red. You hacked my files? No, Ava said, smiling. Your assistant sent them to us. Apparently, she's been a Novacore client for 2 months. Guess she got tired of being called stupid too. The silence that followed was almost comical. I stood slowly, buttoning my blazer. You always thought I was the weakest one. You treated me like background noise. But you forgot that quiet people can still build things. Strong things. Things that last. My mother stared at me, eyes narrowed. You planned this all along. I built this while you weren't looking, I said. The only thing I planned was waiting for the right moment. As I left the room, I heard Bianca mutter something under her breath. I didn't care. That day wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. They had until 3 o'clock. And they were finally, truly out of time. When I left that conference room, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I already knew what I'd see. My mother stunned into silence, Bianca fuming and spiraling, and their advisors scrambling to assess the damage. I didn't need confirmation. The silence in that room had told me everything. For the first time, they saw me not as an assistant, not as someone they could talk over, but as a threat they hadn't seen coming. Back in my office, Ava was already fielding calls. 2 of Monroe Ventures board members just requested a private meeting, she said, tapping rapidly on her tablet. They want to know if the merger is still possible, just without your sister and mother involved. I smiled faintly. Tell them to review the terms. Nothing has changed. If they want Novacore, they take me as I am. I sat at my desk and exhaled. The feeling was unfamiliar, relief mixed with fire. For 12 years, I had been building and hiding, smiling while biting my tongue, growing a company that stood for everything my family didn't. Novacore wasn't just a business. It was a statement that you could lead with strategy, not ego, that you could uplift without tearing down, that you didn't have to be loud to be powerful. I glanced at the time. It was only 10:30 a.m. They still had 4.5 hours to make a choice. And I already knew how the rest of the day would go. By noon, the headlines had started. Secret CEO revealed. The woman behind Novacore Strategies. Monroe Air exposed by sister's billion-dollar power play. My assistant forwarded me links as they rolled in. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. The world was starting to notice what my family had refused to see for over a decade. At 1:45, I received a text from an unfamiliar number. Cassandra, you could have come to us. You didn't have to do this in public. I stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it. There was no apology in her words, just a desperate attempt to maintain control, to reframe the story so she didn't look like the villain. But the truth was I had come to them once, with a pitch, with hope, with trust. And they'd laughed me out of the room. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. At 2:20, Bianca showed up at Nova Corps without an appointment. Ava intercepted her, of course, but I decided to see her anyway. I wanted to hear what she had to say when there was no one around to impress. She stepped into my office like she still owned the world, though the cracks in her armor were obvious, dark circles under her eyes, her phone clutched tightly in her hand like it was a lifeline. You made your point, she said, standing just inside the door. Now what? You want to humiliate us further? I leaned back in my chair. I didn't want to humiliate anyone. I wanted to run my business. You made it personal. You could have just told me, she said, pacing. I would have listened. I would have supported you. I raised an eyebrow. Like when you offered me a job managing your calendar. Or when you told Mom I was too timid to lead anything more than a lunch order. She didn't answer. I didn't tell you because I needed to know for sure. I needed to prove to myself that I could do this without any of you. That I wasn't just the sister or the shadow. Bianca looked around the office. So, this is what matters to you now? Power? No, I said simply. Respect. And that starts by being honest about who we are and what we're capable of. She sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. You know they're going to vote in favor of the merger. They don't have a choice. Our numbers are collapsing. Investors are pulling out. I know, I said. That's why the terms are still on the table, until 3 o'clock. Bianca stared at me for a moment longer, then walked out without another word. I watched her leave, a strange sadness curling in my chest. We had grown up together. We had shared bunk beds and secrets, Sunday morning cartoons and late-night stories. But somewhere along the way, the space between us had widened into a canyon neither of us could cross. At 2:47, Ava walked in, her expression calm but excited. It's done. The board accepted the merger. I nodded. Prepare the press release. And let's get started on the transition plan. She paused. You okay? I thought about it. The anger, the fear, the years of pretending, all of it had led here. I felt lighter. Not giddy. Not triumphant. Just free. I'm okay, I said. Then I reached for the intercom. Send in Cassandra Monroe. She entered without knocking, her heels clicking against the floor like gunfire. Her posture was perfect, as always. Her expression unreadable. I assume you're pleased with yourself, she said. No, I replied. I'm focused on what comes next. You've embarrassed the family. No, I corrected. You embarrassed yourselves when you refused to see me. I just stopped waiting for your permission to succeed. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsure of what to say. I slid a folder across the desk. This is your new position. Senior advisor. You can accept or walk away with the severance listed on page 3. She opened it slowly. You planned everything. I met her gaze. I learned from the best. And I had. I learned how to smile while being underestimated, how to turn rejection into rocket fuel, how to stay quiet just long enough to take control. She left without saying goodbye. I didn't watch her go. I was too busy writing the next chapter. The days after the merger were a whirlwind. My calendar filled with press inquiries, business school invitations, and interview requests from media outlets I'd once only dreamed of. I declined most of them. I wasn't interested in becoming a media sensation. Nova Corps wasn't built on noise, it was built on results. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. The kind that moved beneath the surface until they were undeniable. Still, I agreed to speak at one event, a Women in Leadership Summit hosted in San Francisco. Standing on that stage in front of hundreds of young professionals, I saw reflections of who I used to be. Women with ideas but no platform, confidence but no support. I told them what I wish someone had told me. You don't have to raise your voice to have power. You just have to keep building until the world can't ignore you. When I stepped down from the stage, I was greeted by a familiar face in the crowd. Ava, standing off to the side, holding her phone. "Thought you'd want to see this," she said, passing it to me. It was a post from one of Bianca's former investors. A long, passive-aggressive paragraph trying to shift blame for the failed merger, ending with a line that made me laugh out loud. Bianca Monroe's poor judgment in underestimating key business players has cost this firm dearly. There it was. The truth, out in the open. And I hadn't even needed to say it myself. Back in Seattle, changes at Monroe Ventures happened quickly. We restructured the company into something leaner, more ethical. Gone were the aggressive acquisition tactics. We focused on partnerships, sustainability, and innovation. Some employees resisted, but most adapted. They were tired of working under fear. Now they worked with purpose. Cassandra officially retired 1 month after the merger. Her resignation letter was short, but the final paragraph surprised me. "My daughter taught me that leadership isn't about control, it's about vision. I only wish I had seen her clearly sooner." It didn't erase everything, but it was something. A small bridge between what we had been and what we might still become. Bianca, on the other hand, took longer to accept the shift. She disappeared from the public eye for a while, and I later heard she was working on a new venture. Quietly this time, without fanfare. Maybe she finally understood the value of building before boasting. What surprised me most were the messages from women. Hundreds of them. Former assistants, junior analysts, interns, all saying the same thing. "You gave us hope." I hadn't expected that. I built NovaCore for myself, yes, but knowing it had become a symbol for others made it feel even more real. The following spring, I did something no one expected, not even Ava. I hosted the Monroe family gathering. But this time, it was held in NovaCore's executive conference room. The same one where, for years, I had quietly set out coffee, taken notes, and played invisible. Now, I stood at the head of the room as guests arrived. My cousins blinked in surprise. Some smiled, others avoided eye contact. Cassandra arrived late, of course, perfectly composed, but I caught a flicker of pride in her eyes. When Bianca walked in, she looked around and gave me a small nod. Not an apology, not a surrender, but an acknowledgement. I nodded back. Dinner was served by NovaCore's hospitality team, coffee from our own blend, produced by a company we'd acquired quietly last fall. The same one that used to supply Cassandra's favorite cafe. Full circle. That night, as the laughter of polite conversation filled the air, I stepped onto the rooftop terrace overlooking the city. Ava joined me, handing me a glass of sparkling water. "Think they'll ever truly understand what you did?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "But it doesn't matter anymore. I didn't build this to prove something to them. I built it because I knew I could. And because women like us needed a space where we could lead without asking permission." She smiled. "Still want me to call you boss?" I laughed. "Only when I'm being difficult." I looked out at the skyline. Tall buildings, sharp edges, glowing windows. A city that had once seemed too big for someone like me. Now it was mine. Not because I shouted the loudest or pushed the hardest, but because I waited. I built. I believed. This was never about revenge. It was about truth. About rewriting the story they wrote for me and crafting my own ending. And the best part? I was just getting started.
The sound of dirt hitting my father's casket should have been the worst thing I heard today. It wasn't. That honor belongs to my husband's whispered ultimatum, delivered between clenched teeth while he gripped my elbow too tight. Either we move in with my parents, or I'm filing for divorce. I'm Willow, and this is how my marriage died on the same day we buried my father. The funeral crowd had thinned to just family now, if you could call Jake's parents that anymore. Martha stood across the grave, her vulture-like stare boring into me while Henry hovered at her shoulder like a shadow. They'd been circling closer all afternoon, probably rehearsing their practice speeches about family duty and doing what's best. "You're hurting me," I said, trying to pull away from Jake's grip. He loosened his hold but didn't let go. This isn't a negotiation, Willow. Dad's retiring next month. They need us. My father's body isn't even cold. Exactly. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly about what's best for everyone. I stared at the fresh dirt, fighting the urge to laugh. Or scream. Or both. What's best for everyone? Or what's best for your mother? Don't start with that again. Jake's voice carried that familiar warning tone, the one that usually made me back down. Mom and Dad have given us everything. The least we can do is help them transition into retirement. Samuel, my father's oldest friend, approached slowly from the cemetery path. His presence was like a lifeline, and Jake's grip finally fell away. Martha's eyes narrowed at the interruption. "Willow, dear," Samuel said, his weathered face creased with genuine concern. "Your father would have wanted you to take some time. Process things." "We're family," Martha cut in, gliding forward. "We'll help her process." "Won't we, Jake?" I watched my husband nod, the same way he always did when his mother spoke. 15 years of marriage, and I'd never seen him refuse her anything. The weight of my father's estate papers felt heavy in my purse, papers Jake didn't know about yet. Papers that would change everything. "I need to go," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I have things to arrange at the house." "Our house," Jake corrected. "And it's too big for one person. Mom and Dad's place makes more sense." I said I need to go. Samuel touched my shoulder. "I'll drive you." "She's fine," Jake snapped. "I'll take my wife home." "Actually," I said, "I'm not fine. And I'm not going anywhere with you right now." Martha gasped, perfectly timed for maximum dramatic effect. "Jake, darling, you see how she's acting? This is exactly why she needs us." I turned away, Samuel falling into step beside me. Behind us, I could hear Martha's voice rising. Could practically see Jake's face reddening with that specific shade of embarrassment his mother always managed to produce. "You can't just walk away from family," Martha called after me. But I could. I was. The truth hit me halfway to Samuel's car. I'd been walking away from myself for 15 years, one small step at a time. Letting Jake's family reshape me into their idea of a proper wife. Watching my own dreams fade like old photographs. Not anymore. Samuel opened the car door, and I slid inside, my hands shaking as I buckled the seatbelt. Through the windshield, I could see Jake and his parents huddled together, 3 heads bent in conversation. Planning their next move, no doubt. Let them plan. They didn't know about the recordings yet. Or the letters. Or the truth about what my father had discovered before he died. They had no idea what was coming. Samuel's car pulled up to my father's estate, my estate now, just as the sun was setting. The old Victorian shadow stretched across the lawn like a warning. Jake's Mercedes already sat in the driveway, a sleek reminder that I couldn't avoid what was coming. "You don't have to go in alone," Samuel said, his hand still gripping the steering wheel. "Actually, I do." I gathered my purse, feeling the weight of the estate papers inside. "But thank you. For everything." The front door opened before I reached it. Jake stood there, jacket off, sleeves rolled up like he was ready for battle. Behind him, I could hear Martha's voice floating from the kitchen, probably already reorganizing my cabinets. "Nice of you to finally join us," Jake said, stepping aside to let me pass. "Mom's making dinner. In my kitchen. Our kitchen, Willow. And she's trying to help." I moved past him, the familiar scent of Martha's signature pot roast hitting me like a slap. She'd cooked the same meal for every major event in our married life, birthdays, anniversaries, the day Jake made partner at his firm. Now here it was again, on the day we buried my father. "There you are." Martha's voice carried that artificial brightness she reserved for public performances. She stood at my counter, wearing an apron I'd never seen before, probably brought from her own house. "Henry, look who finally made it home." My father-in-law barely glanced up from his phone, mumbling something that might have been a greeting. "I'm not hungry," I said, heading for the stairs. Jake caught my arm. "Mom went to all this trouble." "Let her go, darling," Martha cut in, her knife clicking against the cutting board. "She's grieving. Though I do wish she'd consider how her behavior affects others." I jerked away from Jake's grip, taking the stairs two at a time. Behind me, I heard Martha's stage whisper, "You see what I mean? This is exactly why she needs us here." My father's study door was ajar. I pushed it open, expecting the familiar comfort of his space. Instead, I froze. The room had been ransacked. Drawers hung open, papers scattered across the desk. The painting behind his chair, the one he'd always joked contained his secrets, hung crooked on the wall. My hands shook as I straightened it, revealing the wall safe behind. Still locked. Thank God. Looking for something specific? I spun around. Jake stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. "What did you do?" "Me?" He stepped inside, closing the door. "I was looking for the will. Since you ran off with Samuel instead of discussing things like an adult. The will is with the lawyers. You know that. Do I? You've been awfully secretive lately." He moved closer, and I caught a whiff of scotch on his breath. "Just like your father was, at the end." A chill ran through me. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means," Jake said, his voice dropping, "that I know he changed his will 3 weeks ago. Right after our last dinner together. Right after Martha and I told him about our plans for developing this property." The pieces clicked into place. The tension at that dinner. My father's sudden insistence on updating his estate planning. The way Jake and Martha had been hovering ever since, watching Dad like hawks. "You were planning this before he even died?" "Planning what?" "To take care of family? To make something of this oversized monument to your father's ego?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. "Your father was sick, Willow. He wasn't thinking clearly." Footsteps creaked on the stairs, followed by Martha's voice, "Everything all right up there?" "Fine, Mom," Jake called back, his eyes never leaving mine. "Willow's just having a moment." I moved toward the door, but he blocked my path. "We're not done here." "Actually," I said, "I think we are. On several levels." His laugh was ugly. "You really want to do this? Fight me over a house and some land? Because I promise you, Willow, you won't win." I thought of the recordings in my purse. The letters. The truth about what Jake and his family had been planning all along. "We'll see about that," I said, pushing past him into the hallway. Martha stood at the top of the stairs, concern painted perfectly across her face. "Dinner's ready, dears. Why don't we all sit down and talk about this like family?" Family. The word had never sounded more like a threat. The blueprints spread across Samuel's kitchen table might as well have been a death sentence for my father's estate. Architectural drawings showed modern buildings sprawling across the land, cutting through gardens my father had tended for 30 years. The date in the corner, 3 months ago, burned into my vision. Jake had these drawn up before Dad even got sick, I said, my fingers tracing the sharp lines that would destroy everything my father built. Look at his signature here. And Martha's company logo. Samuel placed a steaming mug of coffee beside me. There's more. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, I found emails between Jake and various developers, all dated weeks before my father's death. The language was careful, coded, but the intent was clear. They'd been planning to transform the estate into a luxury family compound, complete with separate wings for Jake's parents. They were just waiting for him to die. Not exactly, Samuel said, pulling out another document. They were waiting for him to sign this. The paper trembled in my hands as I read. A transfer of power of attorney, drafted but never signed. My father's signature line sat empty at the bottom, a small victory from beyond the grave. My phone buzzed, another message from Jake. I'd left the house last night after refusing to join their family dinner, and he'd been alternating between threats and pleading ever since. You should read this one, Samuel said, holding up a final email. It's from Martha to the developers, dated 2 weeks before your father's death. The words blurred through tears of rage. Once we secure power of attorney, we can proceed regardless of Willow's objections. Jake assures me she'll fall in line or face consequences. A key turned in Samuel's front door. I scrambled to gather the papers, but Samuel held up a hand. I invited someone. Henry stepped into the kitchen, looking smaller somehow without Martha hovering nearby. His eyes fell on the blueprints. So you found them, he said. Did you know? I demanded. The whole time, did you know what they were planning? He sank into a chair, suddenly every bit his 62 years. Martha said it was for the best. That we'd all be together, like a real family should be. By destroying my father's home? Your father. Henry's laugh was bitter. Do you know what Martha called him? The obstacle. Every night, planning and plotting, while I sat there watching my wife and son turn into people I didn't recognize. My phone buzzed again. Jake's message flashed across the screen, Mom's lawyers are ready. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. They're meeting with contractors today, Henry said, pulling out his own phone. Martha thinks she's won already. She's picking out paint colors for her wing of the house. I stood up so fast my chair toppled backward. They can't. The property isn't even. They don't care, Henry cut in. They never have. It's always been about control. Martha's control. And Jake. He shook his head. Jake never learned to say no to her. Samuel touched my arm. Show him. I pulled out my father's last letter from my purse, the one I'd found in the safe after Jake's failed search. Henry read it slowly, his face growing paler with each line. Your father knew, he whispered. All this time, he knew what they were planning. And he left me everything I need to stop them. I gathered the blueprints and emails. The question is, Henry, whose side are you really on? He stared at his hands for a long moment. When he looked up, something had shifted in his eyes. Martha's at the estate now, he said. She's meeting the contractors at noon. She thinks. He swallowed hard. She thinks she's finally winning. She's not, I said, checking my watch. Because in exactly 45 minutes, I'm going to show her what losing really looks like. Samuel picked up his car keys. I'll drive. Henry stood, straightening his shoulders. I'm coming too. It's time someone stood up to Martha. Even if it has to be me. My phone buzzed one final time. Jake's message was just one line: last chance, Willow. Don't do anything you'll regret. But as we headed for Samuel's car, regret was the last thing on my mind. They wanted a war over my father's legacy? Fine. I'd give them one they'd never forget. Martha's face turned ashen when we walked into the estate's garden. She stood among a cluster of contractors, architectural plans spread across a portable table. Her perfectly manicured finger frozen midpoint on the paper. Jake's expression shifted from confusion to rage as Henry stepped out from behind me. What is he doing here? Martha's voice could have frozen hell. Telling the truth, for once, Henry said. The contractors shifted uncomfortably as I approached the table. One of them, older, with kind eyes, glanced between the blueprints and my face. Mrs. Davidson, I wasn't aware this was a contested development. It's not contested, Jake cut in, moving to stand beside his mother. My wife is just emotional right now. Her father's passing. Her father's murder, you mean? Samuel's quiet words dropped like bombs in the garden. Martha's clipboard clattered to the ground. Jake went still. What did you say? His voice was dangerous, low. I pulled out my father's last letter, along with the medical reports we'd found hidden in his safe. Dad knew about the development plans. He also knew about the sleeping pills Martha had been slipping into his evening tea. Convenient timing, wasn't it? His sudden decline just when you needed him to sign over power of attorney? That's ridiculous, Martha snapped, but her hands were shaking. Henry, tell them how ridiculous this is. I found the pills in your purse, Martha. Henry's voice cracked. 3 days before he died. I told myself I was imagining things. That you wouldn't. That our son wouldn't. The contractors were already packing up, murmuring apologies and quick exits. The older one paused beside me, pressing his card into my hand. Call us when this is sorted, Mrs. Davidson. Legally sorted. Jake grabbed my arm as I tried to follow them. You're making a mistake. The mistake was thinking you ever loved me more than your mother's approval. I jerked away from him. The police are already reviewing the evidence. They're very interested in Martha's monthly prescriptions for sleeping medication. And the timing of your development plans. You wouldn't dare. Martha's perfect facade cracked. After everything we've done for you. Done for me? The laugh that escaped me didn't sound like my own. You mean like systematically isolating me from my friends? Criticizing every decision I made? Planning to destroy my father's legacy while he was still alive? We were trying to help, Jake insisted, but his eyes darted to the medical reports in my hand. Mom just wanted what was best for everyone. Best for everyone? Henry's voice rose. Our son is facing possible conspiracy charges because you couldn't wait a few more months for a legal inheritance? Because you had to control everything, everyone, all the time? Martha turned on him, teeth bared. Don't you dare turn on me now. Everything I did for this family. No. I held up my phone, recording app running. Everything you did for yourself. And now everyone's going to know exactly what kind of person you are. Jake lunged for the phone, but Samuel stepped between us. In the distance, sirens wailed. That'll be Detective Morris, Samuel said quietly. He's very interested in speaking with all of you. Martha's composure shattered completely. Jake, do something. But Jake just stood there, looking lost, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. For the first time, I saw him clearly, not as my husband or Martha's son, but as a hollow man who'd never had the courage to be himself. It's over, I said, watching police cars turn into the driveway. The estate stays as it is. And you all get to explain to the police exactly why my father died 3 days before your development plans were set to begin. You'll regret this, Martha hissed, but her eyes were wild with fear. I thought of my father's last days, of the confusion in his eyes that we'd all dismissed as natural decline. Of the team Martha insisted on preparing herself. Of Jake's convenient business trips that kept him away from witnessing his mother's frequent visits. No, I said, watching Detective Morris approach with his officers. I don't think I will. The handcuffs clicked shut around Martha's wrists, and somewhere in the garden, a bird began to sing. Detective Morris's words echoed through the estate's empty living room. Martha made bail an hour ago. I gripped the armchair, knuckles white. Through the window, I could see Henry pacing the garden, phone pressed to his ear. He hadn't spoken to Martha since her arrest 3 days ago. What about Jake? My voice sounded distant, even to myself. Still in custody. Morris flipped through his notes. But his lawyer's good. Very good. They're already spinning a story about him being manipulated by his mother, claiming he had no knowledge of the sleeping pills. Samuel set a glass of water in front of me, but I couldn't bring myself to drink. He knew. He had to know. Proving it is another matter. Morris leaned forward. We need more than circumstantial evidence. Something concrete linking him directly to your father's death. My phone buzzed, another text from an unknown number. I'd been getting them since Martha's arrest, each one more threatening than the last. This one made my blood freeze. Check the greenhouse. Willow? Samuel touched my shoulder. What is it? I was already moving, Morris and Samuel following as I rushed across the lawn. The greenhouse had been my father's sanctuary, filled with rare orchids he'd spent decades cultivating. The door hung slightly ajar. Inside, devastation greeted us. Every plant had been methodically destroyed, orchid stems snapped, pots shattered. On my father's workbench lay a single teacup, identical to the ones Martha had used. Don't touch anything, Morris barked, pulling out his phone. But my eyes caught something else, a flash of white beneath the broken pottery. I pointed, and Morris carefully extracted a stack of papers. Bank statements. Emails. A second will, dated before the one we'd found in the safe. These are fake, Samuel said, examining them. They're trying to create a paper trail showing your father intended to sell the estate. Martha's handwriting, I said, recognizing the forged signatures. But the plan. This is all Jake. This is how he thinks. Henry appeared in the doorway, face ashen. Martha's gone. Her phone's disconnected, and she cleared out our accounts this morning. A crash from the house made us all jump. We rushed back, Morris drawing his weapon. The front door stood wide open. Inside, Jake stood in my father's study, hands raised as 2 officers trained their weapons on him. At his feet lay the open safe, empty. Looking for these? I held up the stack of evidence from the greenhouse. His eyes narrowed. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand perfectly. You and Martha thought you could forge documents showing Dad wanted to sell. Plant them in the greenhouse, make it look like he'd hidden them. Then discover them after destroying the real evidence. She's lying, Jake said to Morris. Everything in that safe proved Willow's been manipulating the situation. My mother was trying to protect our family's interests. By killing my father? By doing what needed to be done. Jake's composure cracked. You never appreciated what we were trying to build. A legacy. A real family. Not this mausoleum to your father's ego. Henry stepped forward. Where is she, Jake? Where did your mother go? Why? So you can betray her again? Jake's laugh was ugly. You're as weak as Willow's father was. At least Mom had the courage to take action. My phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, but this time with an image, Martha, sitting in what looked like an airport lounge, holding today's newspaper. The text below, last chance. Sign over the estate, or the real evidence about your father's death goes public. She's bluffing, Samuel said, reading over my shoulder. But Jake's smile told a different story. Are you sure about that? Mom kept very detailed records of her visits with your father. Every cup of tea, every conversation. Would you like the world to know how long he suffered before the end? How many times he begged for help while you were too busy to notice? The room spun. Morris was saying something about tracking Martha's phone, Henry was shouting at Jake, but all I could hear was my father's voice from his last days. Something's wrong, Willow. Something's not right. I'd dismissed it as confusion. We all had. Jake's smile widened as he watched me process this. Tick-tock, Willow. How much of Dad's legacy are you willing to destroy to protect your own? Martha's evidence arrived in a plain manila envelope, delivered to the estate by courier. Inside, I found photos, handwritten notes, and a USB drive that documented every step of my father's decline. The final photo showed him in his study, cup of tea in hand, dated the day before he died. The look in his eyes, confusion, fear, betrayal, made my knees buckle. You can't trust these, Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. They could be manipulated. Detective Morris examined the USB drive. The metadata's intact. These are original, unaltered files. Jake sat across the room, still in handcuffs but wearing that familiar smirk. Mom always was thorough. Especially when it came to protecting the family. Protecting the family? Henry's voice cracked. She killed a man, Jake. Your wife's father. She eliminated an obstacle. Jake leaned forward. Just like Willow's become an obstacle. But there's still time to fix this. Sign over the estate and everything goes away. The evidence, the investigation, all of it. Morris's phone buzzed. He stepped away to take the call, then returned looking grim. Martha's been spotted boarding a private plane to a non-extradition country. We're trying to ground it, but... Too late, Jake said. She's probably already in international airspace. Tick-tock, Willow. Once she releases those files to the media, your father's legacy becomes a scandal. Every newspaper, every TV station will run stories about the confused old man who died under suspicious circumstances while his daughter was too busy to notice. My hands shook as I lifted another photo from the envelope. Dad in his garden, looking lost among his beloved orchids. Martha's handwriting on the back, day 47, increased dosage. Subject showing signs of severe confusion. Subject, I whispered. She documented his murder like a science experiment. She documented your negligence, Jake corrected. The devoted mother-in-law who tried to warn you something was wrong. Who stepped in to care for him while you focused on your career. The grieving widow who noticed his decline but couldn't convince his daughter to pay attention. Samuel grabbed my arm as I lurched toward Jake. He's baiting you. The papers are ready, Jake continued. One signature and this all disappears. Mom releases a statement about a misunderstanding, returns to help manage the estate development. Your father's reputation stays intact. Everyone wins. Everyone except Dad. He's dead, Willow. But you're not. Think about your future. About the scandal this will cause. About how people will look at you, wondering if you knew all along what was happening to him. Morris cleared his throat. The planes cleared U.S. airspace. We've notified Interpol, but nothing will stick, Jake finished. Not without creating a media circus that destroys everything your father built. Is that what you want? To turn his legacy into a true crime podcast? I looked around the study, at the books Dad loved, the photos of us together, the garden visible through the window. Everything he'd built, everything he'd loved, tainted by Martha's methodical documentation of his murder. Time's running out, Jake said softly. Mom's given you 1 hour to decide. After that, the files go public. Every detail, every photo, every moment of his suffering. Is your revenge worth destroying his memory? Henry stepped forward. There has to be another way. There isn't. Jake's smile was triumphant. Mom made sure of that. She always does. My phone buzzed, another message from Martha. A video this time, showing Dad in his final days, confused and afraid, calling out for me while Martha's voice soothed him with promises to help. I'll need to see the papers, I said quietly. Willow, no, Samuel protested. But I was already reaching for the document Jake's lawyer had delivered. The estate transfer agreement that would give them everything they wanted. Everything they'd killed for. Smart girl, Jake said. I knew you'd make the right choice. I lifted the pen, feeling its weight like a coffin nail. In the garden, the last of Dad's orchids swayed in the breeze, survivors of Martha's destruction. Soon they'd be gone too, replaced by whatever monument to greed Jake and his mother planned to build. Just sign, Jake urged. End this nightmare. The pen hovered over the signature line as Martha's final text arrived, time's up. Choose wisely. The pen never touched the paper. Instead, I reached for my father's favorite teacup, the one still sitting on his desk, the one Martha had used for her final dose. What are you doing? Jake's smirk faltered. Something Dad taught me. I lifted the cup, examining its delicate pattern. About orchids. About patience. About hidden things. Samuel stepped closer, realization dawning on his face. I caught his eye, saw him reach slowly for his phone. Enough games, Jake snapped. Sign the papers, or Mom releases everything. You mean like this? I turned the cup over, revealing the tiny camera lens embedded in its base. Dad wasn't as confused as you thought. He knew something was wrong, so he started watching. Recording. The color drained from Jake's face. You're lying. The cameras were everywhere. In his teacups, his books, even the orchid pot Martha destroyed yesterday. I nodded to Morris, who was already typing on his phone. Every conversation, every cup of tea, every secret meeting about development plans. All streaming to a secure server. Impossible, Jake whispered, but his eyes darted to the cup, then to his handcuffs. Your mother was thorough, Jake. But Dad was thorough too. I placed the cup back on the desk. He knew you were planning something. He just didn't expect his own family to kill him for it. Martha's voice suddenly filled the room, from Morris's phone, streaming the server's contents. Just drink your tea, Richard. Jake and I have everything under control. Jake lunged forward, despite his restraints. Turn it off. Can't do that, Morris said, nodding to his officers. This is evidence now. All of it. You don't understand, Jake's voice cracked. Mom will release everything. The photos, the videos. Let her. I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear replacing his arrogance. Let the world see what she documented. What you helped cover up. Every file she releases will match perfectly with Dad's recordings, except to show the whole truth. Samuel's phone buzzed. Martha's plane just turned around. Interpol's orders. That's impossible, Jake said. She has diplomatic immunity. Had, Henry cut in, holding up his own phone. I just spoke with our family lawyer. Seems Martha's immunity was tied to my position on the diplomatic corps. The position I resigned from 10 minutes ago. Jake slumped in his chair. Dad, you can't. Can't what? Stand by while your mother faces justice? Like I did when she killed Richard? Henry's voice shook. I've done enough standing by. My phone lit up with a message from Martha, the last one she'd ever send me. You'll regret this. I typed back 3 words, watch the tea. The officers led Jake away as Morris played more recordings. Martha's voice filled the room again, documenting her crimes in perfect detail, while Dad's hidden cameras captured every moment, every confession. Every calculated move. The orchids, Samuel said softly. He hid cameras in the orchids she destroyed yesterday. She thought she was destroying evidence, I replied. She was actually preserving it. Every broken pot released another memory card. Your father, Henry's voice cracked. He knew? He suspected. That's why he changed his will, why he left everything in trust. I picked up the estate transfer papers, tearing them slowly in half. He made sure Martha and Jake could never touch it, no matter what happened to him. Morris ended the playback. We'll need your testimony. You'll have it. Every detail. I looked around the study, at the home Martha had tried to steal, at the legacy she tried to destroy. Let her release her evidence. Let everyone see exactly what kind of person she is. Samuel touched my shoulder. Richard would be proud. No, I said, watching Jake's police escort disappear down the driveway. He'd be heartbroken. But he'd understand. In the garden, through the study window, I could see the surviving orchids swaying in the breeze. Dad's final witnesses, keeping their secrets safe until the moment of truth. Just like he taught me. The verdict came down like thunder in the quiet courtroom. Martha's face remained stone still as the judge read out her sentence, but her hands trembled, rattling her handcuffs. Jake wouldn't look at me, wouldn't look at anyone. His earlier bravado dissolved into something smaller, more fragile. Henry sat beside me, shoulders bowed but steady. He testified against them both, his quiet voice carrying more weight than Martha's theatrical protests or Jake's rehearsed excuses. Outside, reporters waited with their questions about justice and closure, about healing and moving forward. They didn't understand. Some wounds don't heal, they just become part of who you are. Back at the estate, I found Samuel in the greenhouse, carefully tending the surviving orchids. New growth had emerged from the broken stems, tiny green shoots reaching toward the light. Your father's last letter, he said, holding out a weathered envelope. He asked me to wait until after the trial. The paper felt warm, alive somehow. Inside, I found a single page covered in Dad's familiar scrawl. My dearest Willow. If you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and you've discovered the truth about Martha and Jake. I'm sorry for the burden I've placed on you, for the choice I made in documenting everything instead of confronting them directly. But I knew they'd never stop, never be satisfied until they'd taken everything. The cameras weren't just about gathering evidence. They were about teaching you one last lesson, that truth, like the orchids we loved, requires patience, careful tending, and the courage to wait for the right moment to bloom. I've left you more than just the estate. I've left you the strength I always saw in you, even when you couldn't see it yourself. The strength to stand alone, to face hard truths, to protect what matters most. In the greenhouse, behind the broken pottery and Martha's destruction, you'll find something I've been working on. A new hybrid orchid, years in the development. I've named it Willow's Justice, because like you, it thrives not in spite of adversity, but because of it. Plant it. Watch it grow. Let it remind you that even in our darkest moments, beauty finds a way. All my love. Dad. Samuel touched my shoulder. There's something else you should see. He led me to the back of the greenhouse, where a single pot sat hidden behind the wreckage. Inside, a stunning orchid bloomed, petals white as truth, streaked with veins of deep purple like justice finally served. He finished it just before. Samuel's voice trailed off. The genetics are completely unique. It's officially registered with the Royal Horticultural Society. Your father's final legacy, and yours. My phone buzzed, a message from Detective Morris. Martha's private plane had been seized, her offshore accounts frozen. Jake's law firm had stripped his name from their partnership. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling, one piece at a time. I switched off the phone. Help me clean up this mess? I asked Samuel, gesturing to the broken pots and scattered soil. He smiled, understanding what I wasn't saying. Sometimes healing starts with simple things, dirt under your fingernails, broken things made whole, new life emerging from decay. We worked in comfortable silence, clearing debris and salvaging what we could. Henry joined us later, his diplomatic polish replaced by workman's gloves and determination. Together, we rebuilt what Martha had tried to destroy, making space for something new to grow. As the sun set, I placed Willow's Justice in the center of the greenhouse. Its petals caught the fading light, transforming it into something almost otherworldly, beautiful and resilient, like truth finally set free. Dad was right. Some things require patience, careful tending, the courage to wait. And some things, like justice and orchids and healing, bloom in their own time, in their own way. I touched a perfect white petal, feeling its strength beneath the delicate surface. Tomorrow would bring more questions, more reporters, more pieces to pick up. But tonight, in this greenhouse my father loved, surrounded by broken things growing whole again, I finally understood what he'd known all along. The most powerful legacy isn't in what we leave behind, but in what we help others become strong enough to grow for themselves.
I never expected my life to unravel over a post-it note. You know those small yellow squares people use for quick reminders? Yeah, one of those was about to turn my world upside down. My name is Jamie, and until last Tuesday, I thought I had it all figured out. Great career, loving husband, and the kind of life that made other people wonder how I managed to keep all the plates spinning. Spoiler alert, I didn't. I just returned from a 3-day business trip to Chicago, dragging my wheeled suitcase through our quiet house at 11 p.m. The lights were off, except for the dim glow of the kitchen under-cabinet lighting we always left on. That's when I saw it, a yellow square stuck to the refrigerator door. Need some time to think. Don't wait up. 8 words. That's all Ethan left me after 12 years together, 5 of them married. I stood there in my wrinkled blazer, still wearing my uncomfortable heels, staring at his handwriting until the letters started to blur. Ethan. I called out anyway, my voice echoing through our empty house. No response, of course. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. Hey, it's Ethan. Leave a message. Hey, just got home. Got your note. call me when you can. I tried to keep my voice casual, like I wasn't standing in our dark kitchen at nearly midnight, talking to his voicemail while my stomach tied itself in knots. I kicked off my heels and walked through the house, flipping on lights as I went. Everything looked normal, almost too normal. His laptop was missing from his usual spot on the coffee table, but otherwise, there were no signs of. What was I even looking for? My phone buzzed, and I nearly dropped it in my rush to check the screen. But it was just a text from Helen, my mother-in-law. Hope you had a safe flight home, sweetheart. Lunch tomorrow. I stared at her message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Helen had been more of a mother to me than my own in the past few years. She'd know if something was wrong with Ethan, wouldn't she? Instead of replying, I walked upstairs to our bedroom. Ethan's side of the closet looked untouched, his suits hanging in their usual order. His dresser drawers were closed, his watch still on the nightstand. Everything seemed fine, except for the gnawing feeling in my gut that nothing was fine at all. I changed into one of his old t-shirts, a habit I'd picked up years ago, and sat on our bed, scrolling through my phone. No new messages from Ethan. No missed calls. Just that stupid yellow post-it note downstairs, mocking me with its vagueness. The last time I'd seen him was Sunday morning, before I left for my flight. We'd had coffee together, talked about his mother's upcoming doctor's appointment, made plans for the weekend. Everything had seemed normal. Hadn't it? But now that I thought about it, there had been something off in his smile when he kissed me goodbye. A hesitation in his hug that I'd brushed off as early morning sluggishness. The way he'd lingered in the doorway watching me load my suitcase into the Uber. My phone buzzed again, another text from Helen. Ethan mentioned he might be working late this week. Everything okay? I felt my chest tighten. Working late? Since when did Ethan work late? As an IT consultant, he usually kept regular hours, often working from home. Something wasn't adding up. I typed back quickly, just got home. Everything's fine. Lunch tomorrow sounds great. But as I lay there in our too-empty bed, staring at the ceiling fan slowly spinning above me, I knew I was lying. Nothing was fine. That little yellow post-it note was just the beginning, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew our life together was about to change forever. I just didn't know how much. The hospital corridor smelled like artificial lemons and broken promises. I'd come straight from work to visit Helen, still wearing my power suit like some kind of corporate armor. The text from the hospital had arrived during my morning meeting. Helen had been admitted after a bad fall. Jamie, sweetheart. Helen's face lit up as I entered her room, though I could see the pain behind her smile. She was propped up against stark white pillows, looking smaller than usual in the hospital bed. You didn't have to rush over. Of course I did. I leaned down to hug her, careful of the 4 in her arm. Have you heard from Ethan? I tried calling him. A flicker of something, confusion. Concern. Crossed Helen's face. He stopped by briefly this morning. Said he had some work emergency. She paused, studying my face. Is everything all right between you two? I busied myself arranging the flowers I'd brought, buying time to steady my voice. Why do you ask? Mother's intuition, maybe. Helen reached for my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. He seems distracted lately. Not himself. He left me a note last night, I admitted, sinking into the visitor's chair. Said he needed time to think. Hasn't been home since. Helen's monitor beeped steadily in the background as she processed this. That doesn't sound like my son. No, I agreed. It doesn't. My phone buzzed, a text from Ethan. Sorry about last night. Crazy work situation. Talk soon. I showed Helen the message. She frowned, her fingers tightening around mine. Jamie, there's something. The door opened, and a nurse walked in with Helen's medication. The moment shattered like glass, whatever Helen had been about to say lost in the routine of vital signs and pill cups. "Mrs. Lark, how's your pain level?" the nurse asked, checking Helen's chart. "Oh, manageable," Helen said, but I saw her wince as she shifted position. "Though I wouldn't say no to something stronger." While the nurse adjusted Helen's medication, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Greg. "Hey, you guys free for dinner Friday? Megan's making her famous lasagna." I hesitated, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Greg and Megan had been our friends since college, but the thought of pretending everything was normal made my stomach churn. "Who's that?" Helen asked after the nurse left. "Greg. Dinner invitation." "Go," Helen insisted. "You need to get out, not sit here watching me sleep. Besides." She paused, that same strange look crossing her face. "Maybe Ethan will actually show up for that." Before I could respond, my phone rang, work calling. I stepped into the hallway to take it, watching through the window as Helen closed her eyes. Her face tight with pain that had nothing to do with her fall. When I returned, Helen was holding a small photo album I recognized from her bedside table at home. "Look what Ethan brought this morning," she said, patting the bed beside her. "Come see." I sat on the edge of her bed, and she opened the album. There we were, Ethan and me on our wedding day, both of us laughing at something off camera. I remembered that moment. Greg had tripped over his own feet trying to take the picture. "You know what I see when I look at this?" Helen asked softly. "I see my son looking at you like you're his whole world." "Helen. Let me finish." She turned the page. Another photo, this one from Christmas last year. Ethan and I in matching ugly sweaters, his arm around my waist. "Something's wrong, isn't it? Something more than just a note?" I stared at the photo, at our smiling faces, trying to pinpoint when things had started to change. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm going to find out." Helen closed the album, her hands trembling slightly. "Jamie, there's something you should know about." Her monitor suddenly erupted in sharp beeps. Helen's face went pale, her hand clutching her chest. I lunged for the call button as she gasped for breath. "Help!" I shouted into the hallway. "I need help in here." As medical staff rushed in, I was pushed aside, forced to watch helplessly as they worked on Helen. My phone buzzed again, another text from Ethan. But this one wasn't meant for me. Megan's lasagna sat untouched on my plate as I watched Ethan check his phone for the 1000th time that evening. We were at Greg and Megan's house for our usual Friday dinner, but nothing about this felt usual. "Sorry," Ethan muttered, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "Work stuff. On a Friday night?" Greg raised an eyebrow. "Man, they're working you too hard." I took a sip of wine, remembering the text I'd glimpsed on Ethan's phone at the hospital. The one that wasn't meant for me, "Miss you already. Can't wait until Friday." "Jamie, how's Helen doing?" Megan asked, refilling my glass without waiting for an answer. Her hand trembled slightly, spilling a few drops of red wine on the white tablecloth. "Stable," I said, watching Megan dab at the stain with her napkin. "The doctors say she can probably go home next week." "That's great news." Greg smiled. "We should all visit her this weekend." Ethan's phone buzzed again. He pushed back from the table. "Sorry, I need to take this." As he walked onto the back porch, I noticed Megan's eyes following him. She quickly looked away when she caught me watching. "So," Greg said, clearly trying to fill the awkward silence, "anyone want dessert?" Megan made tiramisu. "I'll help you get it," Megan offered, practically jumping from her chair. Through the glass doors, I could see Ethan pacing, running his hand through his hair the way he did when he was stressed. His face was illuminated by his phone screen, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of his expression, not stressed, but smiling. "Jamie?" Greg's voice snapped me back. "You okay?" "Yeah, just." I gestured vaguely at my barely touched lasagna. Not very hungry. In the kitchen, I heard a glass shatter, followed by Megan's muffled curse. Greg rushed to help her, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the view of my husband having what was clearly not a work call. My phone buzzed, a text from Helen. Doctors say I can have visitors tomorrow. Will you come? Bring Ethan if you can find him. The sliding door opened, and Ethan returned, slipping his phone away with that same secret smile. Sorry about that. Where's dessert? Megan dropped something, I said, studying his face. Everything okay with work? Yeah, just a server issue. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Nothing major. Greg and Megan returned with the tiramisu, but Megan's eyes were red, and she'd changed her blouse. Everything okay in there? I asked. Fine. Megan's voice was too bright. Just clumsy me, breaking things. As Greg served dessert, I watched the way Megan's hands shook, the way Ethan kept checking his phone under the table. The way neither of them would look directly at anyone else. Actually, I said, standing up, I should probably go. Helen texted about visiting tomorrow, and I need to review some work documents tonight. I'll stay and help clean up, Ethan said quickly. Too quickly. No, I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. You should come home. We need to talk. The room went silent. Greg looked between us, confusion clear on his face. Megan suddenly became very interested in her dessert. Can it wait? Ethan asked. I promised Greg I'd help him with his new gaming setup. Did you? I turned to Greg. Did he promise that? Greg shifted uncomfortably. We hadn't really. Right. I grabbed my purse. Thanks for dinner, Megan. The lasagna was delicious. Jamie, wait, Ethan started. No. I cut him off. Either come home now, or don't come home at all. Your choice. I walked out before anyone could respond, but through the front window, I saw Megan grab Ethan's arm, shaking her head slightly. He pulled away, but didn't follow me. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel, watching the house. The text from the hospital was still open on my phone, miss you already. Can't wait until Friday. Friday. Dinner at Greg and Megan's. My hands stopped shaking as a strange calm settled over me. Now I knew. Now I could plan. Helen had tried to warn me, I realized. Before her attack, she'd been about to tell me something. Something about her son, and possibly about the woman I'd thought was my friend. Well, they wanted to play games. Fine. Game on. Ethan didn't come home that night. Or the next. Our house felt like a museum of someone else's life, photos on walls, mixed up coffee mugs in the cabinet, his shoes still by the door. I spent Saturday morning in my home office, pretending to work while actually scrolling through months of phone records. The hospital called around noon. Jamie? Helen's voice was weak. Could you bring my gray cardigan from home? The one with the pearl buttons? Of course. I was already grabbing my keys. How are you feeling? Better now that I've seen Greg. There was a pause. He stopped by this morning. Alone. My hand froze on the doorknob. Greg came to see you. He seemed worried. Asked some strange questions about you and Ethan. I found Helen's cardigan in her bedroom closet, neatly hung next to other cardigans that all looked exactly the same to me. As I reached for it, something fell from the pocket, a small, leather-bound notebook. Jamie? Helen was still on the line. Are you there? Yeah, sorry. Just found your sweater. I picked up the notebook, recognizing Helen's careful handwriting. I'll be there soon. I hung up and opened the notebook. The first page was dated 3 months ago. Ethan came by today. Something's wrong, he's not himself. Mentioned trouble at work, but I know my son. This is different. When I asked about Jamie, he changed the subject. Megan dropped by later, asking about him. Said Greg was worried too. But the way she asked. My phone buzzed, a text from Greg, "Can we talk? Alone?" I stared at the message, then back at Helen's notebook. The next entry was from 2 weeks ago. Saw them together at Carlton's cafe. They didn't see me. Ethan was holding her hand across the table. My heart breaks for Jamie. Should I tell her? Would she believe me? Another text from Greg, "Please. It's important." I texted back, "Coffee shop on 5th. 30 minutes. Greg was already there when I arrived, fidgeting with a paper napkin. He looked like he hadn't slept. "I need to tell you something," he said as I sat down. "About Megan. And Ethan." "I know." He blinked. "You do." "Not everything." I placed Helen's notebook on the table. "But enough." Greg stared at the notebook, then pushed his coffee aside. "Last night, after you left," Megan confessed. "They've been." He couldn't finish. "How long?" 6 months. His voice cracked. "She says it's over, but the texts are still coming," I finished. "The secret meetings. The lies." He nodded, looking destroyed. I found hotel receipts. Credit card statements. They were together when Helen had her attack. My coffee turned to acid in my stomach. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." Greg met my eyes. "What are we going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, "Back off. You don't want this fight." I showed it to Greg. His face hardened. "That's Megan's work phone," he said. "She thinks I don't know about it." Another text, "Some things are better left alone. For Helen's sake." My hands started shaking, not from fear, but rage. They were threatening Helen now. "Greg," I said, my voice deadly calm, "how good are you still with computers?" "Good enough." "Why?" I showed him the threatening texts. "Because I think it's time we stop playing defense." He studied my face for a moment, then pulled out his laptop. "What do you need?" "Everything. Bank records, emails, phone logs. Especially from their work accounts." I took Helen's notebook back, clutching it like a weapon. "They want to play dirty. Let's show them what dirty really looks like." As Greg started typing, my phone buzzed one more time. A message from Helen. "The doctors found something on my latest scan. We need to talk. Soon." I looked at Greg, then at the notebook, then at the threatening texts. Time was running out, and I had to choose, protect Helen, expose the truth, or take revenge. Maybe, with the right plan, I could do all three. The doctor's words hung in the air like smoke, stage 3 pancreatic cancer. Helen sat in her hospital bed, calm as ever. While I felt the room spin around me. "How long have you known?" I managed to ask. "A few weeks." Helen reached for my hand. "I didn't want to add to your troubles." My phone buzzed, another work email about the upcoming Thanksgiving conference in New York. I was supposed to give the keynote speech, a career-defining moment. The timing couldn't have been worse. "Does Ethan know?" Helen's silence was answer enough. She hadn't told him, and he hadn't been around to notice. "I'll cancel my trip," I said. "The conference can find another speaker." "Absolutely not." Helen's grip tightened. "I won't have you sacrificing your career. Ethan can take care of me." I almost laughed at that. Ethan, who hadn't been home in days. Ethan, who was too busy with Megan to visit his own mother in the hospital. My phone buzzed again, Greg this time, found something in their emails. "You need to see this." "Jamie?" Helen's voice pulled me back. There's something else you should know. Before she could continue, Ethan walked in. He looked surprised to see me, like he'd been hoping to avoid exactly this scenario. "Mom," he said, barely glancing my way. "How are you feeling?" "Like I have cancer," Helen replied dryly. "But you'd know that if you'd been here when the doctors explained everything." Ethan flinched. "I've been busy with work." I finished for him. "Strange, since Greg mentioned your company's been on holiday schedule this week." The tension in the room could have powered a small city. Ethan's phone chimed, that familiar sound that made my stomach turn. "You should get that," I said. "Might be important." Helen watched this exchange with knowing eyes. "Ethan, why don't you get me some water?" Once he left, Helen pulled something from under her pillow, an envelope. "I wrote this weeks ago, when I first suspected everything. Don't open it yet. Wait until after Thanksgiving. Helen. Promise me." Her voice was steel. "And promise you'll go to that conference." "I have my reasons." My phone lit up with Greg's messages. Email trail shows hotel bookings. Financial transfers. They're planning something over Thanksgiving. Ethan returned with the water, and his phone chimed again. This time, I caught a glimpse of the screen. Everything's arranged for next week. Once she's in New York. The pieces clicked together like a terrible puzzle. They were waiting for me to leave town. Planning something while I was gone. "I should go," I said, standing. "Need to prepare for the conference." "You're still going?" Ethan asked too quickly. "Of course." I smiled, channeling every business negotiation I'd ever conducted. "It's important for my career." "You'll take care of Helen, right?" He nodded, relief visible on his face. "Of course." I hugged Helen goodbye, feeling the envelope crinkle between us. "I'll see you after Thanksgiving." In the hallway, I texted Greg, "Need a favor. How good are you at accessing security cameras?" His response was immediate, "Already on it." "What's the plan?" I looked back through the hospital room window. Helen was showing Ethan her notebook, the decoy one I'd planted earlier, not the real one in my purse. Ethan was falling for it, just like he'd fall for my apparent departure for New York. "They think I'm leaving town," I wrote to Greg. "Let's give them exactly what they want." Another text from Megan's burner phone arrived, "Smart choice about the conference. Some distances are better kept." I clutched Helen's envelope, my decision crystallizing. They thought they were setting a trap, but they just walked into mine. "One more thing," I texted Greg. "Book me a hotel room in New York. Make sure everyone knows about it. Let them think they had me figured out. Let them think I was running away." Thanksgiving was going to be interesting this year. The security footage from our house played on Greg's laptop, showing Ethan and Megan entering at 2 a.m. I watched from my rental car parked across the street, where I'd been since supposedly leaving for New York yesterday. "They're in your bedroom," Greg's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Want me to kill the feed?" "No." My voice sounded strange, even to me. "Keep recording." My phone lit up with a text from Helen's nurse, "Mrs. Lark asking for you. Says it's urgent." I gripped the steering wheel harder, torn between two betrayals unfolding simultaneously. The one in my bedroom and the one at the hospital, where Ethan hadn't visited Helen once since I'd left. "Jamie," Greg warned, "they're accessing your home office computer." Of course they were. The fake financial documents I'd left there would keep them busy. What they didn't know was that every keystroke was being logged, every file access recorded. Another text from Helen's nurse, "Doctor says her condition is deteriorating rapidly." "Greg," I said, "send me the hospital's security feed." The split screen on my phone showed two scenes, my bedroom and Helen's hospital room. My husband and his lover rifling through my personal files while my mother-in-law lay alone, fighting for her life. Helen's envelope sat heavy in my jacket pocket, still unopened. Wait until after Thanksgiving, she'd said. But watching her now, alone in that hospital bed, I couldn't wait any longer. My hands shook as I opened it. My dearest Jamie. By now you know about Ethan and Megan. What you don't know is why I've been protecting them. The cancer isn't new, I've known for months. Ethan discovered something in the insurance paperwork. Something that could ruin everything. Your company's health insurance, which covers me as a dependent, has a clause about pre-existing conditions. If they discover I knew about the cancer before the policy took effect. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Helen had kept quiet about her diagnosis to protect my career, while Ethan and Megan had been using this information to. Movement in your office, Greg interrupted. They're accessing your work emails. On the hospital feed, Helen's monitors started beeping erratically. Medical staff rushed into her room. Jamie, Greg's voice was urgent, they're sending emails from your account. Something about insurance fraud. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. They weren't just having an affair, they were setting me up. Using Helen's condition to manufacture a fraud case against me. Once I was discredited and fired, Helen would lose her insurance coverage. My phone rang, the hospital's number. Mrs. Lark is asking for you, the nurse said. She's very agitated. The doctor says. In my bedroom, Ethan and Megan were celebrating, champagne in hand. My champagne. My bed. My life. The doctor says she may not make it through the night. I started the car, then stopped. If I went to the hospital, I'd lose the evidence I needed to stop them. If I stayed, I might lose Helen. Greg, I said, send everything to my lawyer. Everything. Already done. But Jamie, there's something else. Something in their emails about Helen's original diagnosis. The hospital feed showed Helen reaching for her phone, her hands shaking. My phone buzzed with her message. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have told you sooner. The insurance. It wasn't just about me. Check the dates on Ethan's first email to Megan. The day I got my diagnosis. The day your company announced your promotion. The day everything started falling apart. In my bedroom, Ethan raised his glass in a mock toast, unaware he was being recorded. Unaware that his mother was dying. Unaware that his carefully constructed plan was about to backfire. But as I sat there, watching both screens, I realized I couldn't win this one. Not completely. Whatever I chose, justice or mercy, revenge or protection, I would lose something precious. Helen's monitor flatlined. And I made my choice. I walked into my house exactly 36 minutes after Helen's heart stopped. The champagne bottle still sat empty on my bedroom floor, but Ethan and Megan had moved to the kitchen. I could hear their laughter floating up the stairs as I silently made my way to my office. My laptop was still open, emails drafted and ready to send that would destroy my career. Evidence of insurance fraud carefully constructed to look like I'd known about Helen's condition all along. Their perfect plan. I pressed send on my own email, the one containing every recorded minute of their betrayal, copied to the board of directors, HR, and Greg's lawyer. Then I walked downstairs. You're supposed to be in New York, Ethan said, freezing with a wine glass halfway to his lips. Megan dropped her phone, face draining of color. Helen's dead. My voice didn't shake. She died alone because her son was too busy trying to destroy his wife to visit his dying mother. Ethan's face went through a series of emotions, shock, grief, guilt, before settling on something harder. Jamie, whatever you think you know. I know everything. I pulled out my phone, playing the security footage of them in my office. Every email. Every meeting. Every plan to use Helen's illness to frame me for fraud. Megan stepped forward, hands raised. We can explain. Can you explain this? I played Helen's final voice message, the one she'd recorded just before her heart gave out. Her voice filled the kitchen. I'm sorry, Ethan. I told them everything. About the original diagnosis, about your plan with Megan. About the real insurance fraud, the one you committed 3 years ago. Ethan lunged for my phone, but I was ready. I stepped back, watching his face contort as his mother's confession continued. You used my illness twice, Helen's voice accused. Once to embezzle from your company, hiding the transactions under my medical bills. And now to frame Jamie when she got too close to discovering it. Turn it off, Ethan growled. Why? Afraid to hear how your mother spent her final hours making sure the truth came out. Megan grabbed her purse, heading for the door, but Greg was already there. He'd been waiting outside, and now he blocked the only exit. Going somewhere? He asked his wife. The board has everything, I said, watching Ethan's face as it all crumbled around him. The real fraud evidence. The affair. Helen's statement. They're probably reading it right now. Ethan's phone started ringing. Then Megan's. Then mine. You don't understand, Ethan pleaded, suddenly desperate. I did it for Mom. The insurance wouldn't cover her experimental treatments. So you stole the money, I finished. I would have helped you, Ethan. We could have found another way. And then what? He spat. Watch you play the hero while I remained the failing son. Watch my dying mother love you more than me. His words hung in the air, revealing the real betrayal, not just of our marriage, but of himself. My phone buzzed again, the hospital, asking about Helen's arrangements. In the end, she'd chosen me as her medical proxy, not Ethan. Her final act of trust. The police will be here soon, Greg said quietly. The board's filing charges. Megan started crying, but Ethan just stood there, staring at the phone still playing his mother's voice. His final message from her, and it was a testimony against him. I could have forgiven the affair, I said, turning to leave. But using your mother's death as a weapon? That's something Helen never forgave you for, and neither will I. Jamie, wait, Ethan called out, but I was already walking away. Outside, the November air was sharp with coming snow. My phone showed dozens of missed calls, the board, the police, the hospital. The next few hours would be chaos. But as I got in my car, I noticed one last unread message from Helen, sent moments before she died, remember? Sweetheart, sometimes the best revenge is living well. I started the engine, leaving Ethan and Megan to face the consequences of their choices. Helen had taught me that justice and revenge aren't always the same thing. Sometimes they're better. 6 months after Helen's funeral, I stood in her garden, surrounded by the spring flowers she'd planted last fall. Her final gift, blooming in defiance of everything that had happened. The house sale was closing today. Ethan wouldn't be there, he couldn't be, given the conditions of his plea deal. The embezzlement charges had stuck, even if Megan had managed to avoid prosecution by turning state's evidence. Last box, Greg said, carrying a carefully wrapped photo album to my car. He'd been my rock through all of this, even as he navigated his own divorce from Megan. Found something you should see, he added, pulling an envelope from his pocket. It was hidden behind Helen's bedroom mirror. The envelope was dated 3 days before her death, addressed to me in her elegant handwriting. Inside was a key and a letter. My dearest Jamie. By the time you read this, you'll know everything. About Ethan's betrayal, about Megan, about the money. But there's one last thing you don't know, something I've kept hidden for 30 years. The key opens a safety deposit box at First National. What you find there might help you understand why I wasn't surprised by Ethan's actions. Some patterns repeat across generations, but you've shown me they can also be broken. You were the daughter I always wanted. Remember that. Love, Helen. My phone buzzed, a text from my lawyer. Ethan signed the divorce papers. It's done. I looked at the key in my hand, then at the blooming garden. Helen had known, not just about Ethan's recent betrayals, but about something deeper, older. Something she'd kept hidden until she was sure I was strong enough to handle it. Want company? Greg asked, noticing my expression. I shook my head. This one I need to do alone. The bank was quiet when I arrived. The safety deposit box contained a single manila envelope, thick with documents. On top was another note from Helen. The truth about Ethan's father, and why I never told anyone how he really died. My hands shook as I read the decades-old police reports, newspaper clippings, and Helen's private journals. The pattern she'd mentioned became clear, a history of financial fraud, betrayal, and secrets that had shaped both mother and son. But Helen had broken the cycle. She'd chosen truth over protection in the end, chosen justice over family loyalty. Chosen me. My phone buzzed again, work this time. The promotion I'd been worried about losing had turned into a CEO position at a competing firm. Life had a way of surprising you. As I drove home, I passed the street where Megan now lived alone, where Greg was rebuilding his life, where Ethan had lost everything. The revenge I'd wanted had come naturally, without me having to orchestrate it. Helen had taught me that too. Sometimes justice works best when you step back and let truth do its work. At home, I found one last surprise, a small package from Helen's lawyer. Inside was a set of garden tools and seeds, with a final note. For your new beginning. Some gardens grow better after a fire. I stood in my backyard, holding the seeds Helen had chosen for me months ago, planning for a future she wouldn't see but had helped create. The spring air was thick with possibility. My phone lit up with another text, an unknown number. For a moment, I tensed, remembering those threatening messages from months ago. But this was different. Thank you for the flowers on Mom's grave. You were a better child to her than I ever was. I didn't respond. Some conversations were better left in the past. Instead, I knelt in the soft earth and began to plant Helen's seeds, understanding finally what she'd meant about patterns and choices. About revenge and grace. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying what hurt you. Sometimes it's about growing something new in the ashes of what was lost. I dug my hands into the soil and began my new chapter, Helen's last lesson blooming around me like a garden after rain.